Hello again, everybody, and welcome inside the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show. I am George the Howitzer Gerbo.
And I am Mike the Buzz-saw Asti.
Sports Talk back with you as we are headed full steam here into the new year. We've been busy, professionally, personally, a lot of things going on in this crazy world, but we have made it to the end of a year and the beginning of another one. And good as always to do it here with this program and to be back with the Buzzsaw once again during this lovely holiday season.
Yeah, how many years now is this of the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show in some form or fashion, some incarnation? And there's been many, I believe 14 years.
Yeah, January of 11.
I believe January 11
yeah,
was
January 2011,
the
so there we are.
inception of the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show. So we are still here, lives, professional careers, much different now than they were back then. But the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show is still here, and yes, we now are on the tail end of the holiday season. Christmas is over, maybe the beginning of whatever else many of you may celebrate, but Christmas is over. Had a nice one with the family for sure, another one for my daughter, and we now approach another new year. I'm sure it's going to bring us much more to talk about here in the HBS in terms of sports drama, intrigue, and I'm sure the news will get asinine as well. And I also am proud to announce that I did receive the greatest white elephant gift of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Family does white elephant gifts. It's part of a party that we call the lasagna party for all the December birthdays. I'm in January, but still attended, and it was great. And I now owner of Snoop Dogg.
Oh my goodness.
Snoop on a stoop. Right here. I have him on a stoop behind me here for the video listeners. You got a gold chain here. He's clearly enjoying himself and smoking something. This is Elf Snoop Dogg on a stoop, and this was my white elephant gift. I feel like I won the exchange with this.
There we go. There we go. He's just chilling.
Yeah, we'll set him back up. He's definitely just chilling. It automatically has his arms out, just completely relaxed, of course. As his mind on his money and his money on his mind, as we are about to kickstart another Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show, the last one of 2024.
Indeed. We remind you to find the program wherever you get your podcast. Search Howitzer Buzz-saw to find us. Apple, YouTube, Spotify, TuneIn, and more. Also, a shout out to our friend Kellenby Conley in the Hyphen podcast group for all the great content they put out, including our show and all of the music you hear right here on the HBS, courtesy of B-. Check him out, hyphenuniverse.com.
Absolutely. And again, if you cannot find us, whether it be 2024 or into 2025, you're just not trying hard enough. But again, of course, the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show available everywhere you get your podcasts and on social media at Gerbo3 for my co-hosts there, at Mike Asti 11 and at Howitzer Buzz-saw for the show handle, all over social media, no matter what platform you may be browsing.
Let's get it started. And we try, we're trying to run from it. And sometimes asinity finds you all the same. It's been an asinine month in the world of college football for a lot of reasons, personal and professional, close to home and far away, between coaching changes at West Virginia, our alma mater, and the place that Mike covers professionally, to we've got the transfer portal that going just all kinds of haywire. The National Signing Day early period deadline or period was moved ahead of the portal, so you've got that wrinkle thrown in. And
college football is a lot different than it was when we started this HBS in 2011. Not only the programs that we're covering, but college football in general, the landscape of college athletics. And of course, we now are here into a 12-team playoff. And at that point, we weren't even yet into the 4-team playoff. And we're likely going to be at 14, 16. And the chaos continues, whether it be the portal or coaching changes. So it's just amazing to hear you say all that and where we were a little over a decade ago and now where we are.
Well, and the dates sports. I have the Maryland's games and things like that, and I cover basketball concurrently. So, that those start to merge for everybody that does the same like you do in November and December. And at some point in November, like I'm just starting to, okay, they're not, not going to get to a bowl game. So here's the portal, this and that. Was signing day. I was like, I looked at the thing and I thought I was like fooled by it. I thought it was a joke. And I was like, why is it the 6th of December? And went and back into my list of stories last year, and it was December 20th or whatever that I wrote the story last year about signing day. And then this year they moved it up. And now you've got that being an issue to start with, where some teams don't even have, including West Virginia, didn't have a head coach in place at the time that their signing day happened. And then glom onto the back end of it, this portal and the window, which closes here this week, and players that are on teams that are still playing,
right,
and could be playing for 3 more games, 3 more week, or 3 more.
If you're in the
events.
national championship game, you're playing on January 20th.
Yeah.
And I repeat, by the way, for anyone who's confused about hearing that date, yes, Inauguration Day, same day as the national championship game. I didn't stutter, but as asinine as that day is going to be for anyone covering the world, let alone politics and sports, with that combined atmosphere. But that's a far journey. You're knee deep in the NFL postseason. But normally, when we were growing up, January 20th, you're gearing up for the Super Bowl, conference championship game. Maybe when we got a little older, later on to the Super Bowl, but certainly you're done with college football. And now that's when you're playing the national title. So those teams, literally, George, the teams that play in the national championship game are going to have about a month, and then they're in the spring game situation. Like, you're getting no break at all by going deep into the postseason. And as Nick Saban put it so eloquently, the main issue here that no one is talking about, and obviously college football in particular, is basically a minor league system, if not a top system. It's a pro league. It's one of the top pro leagues in the world, really behind only the NFL. It's a minor league system for the National Football League.
I would argue second most popular sport in America is college football.
Yeah, 100%. And there are some that like it more than the NFL. The numbers still give it to the NFL, obviously. But yeah, beating the NBA, beating every other sport in a landslide. And the conversation churns year round, like the NBA, like the NFL, like some other sports would dream of. But what I was going to say is, and Nick Saban brought this up, the main issue here, the undercard to this main issue, separate from the calendar and having no break and the portal being open during the postseason, the academic calendar and your sports calendar don't even come close to lining up at all, where that used to be a thing they would try to do. That's gone now. So this year was more chaotic than ever before, especially when, again, the program I covered in West Virginia, I can pretty much confirm that they did land on Rich Rodriguez, but they would have hired somebody else if you didn't have this crazy calendar and having it pushed out. I mean, I can tell you that they were talking to Andy Kotelnicki with Penn State, and the fact that he potentially would be coaching into January was a problem. It was a problem, which you can understand. You just articulated all the things he would have missed if he would have got the job. So you wonder if this calendar ever gets adjusted, because how can assistants get jobs when that's an issue for them? Number one, whether it be the the coach getting hired or the program hiring him. And then you had a lot more movement, a lot more players. Bo Pribula, for example, with Penn State, the backup, who was very involved in their season this year, needing to jump off the team and go in the portal and now ending up in the SEC. But this has been a thing since the portal, since the advent of the playoff. It's not new. I think my annoyance sometimes as people cover this as if it's new and it's like this crazy thing that just occurred this year. There were players in this situation last year that had to leave teams. That were put in this situation. The transfer portal was chaotic. Coaches were in this situation where they wanted to get hired somewhere, and teams were deciding this last year, the year before. But this year, it really got asinine. And you do wonder, with continuous conversation more than ever before on national shows, if this ever reverts or there's ever anything to calm this down. I don't think there really can be. I don't see how that's possible. But I was covering the Rich Rod intro / pep rally on the McAfee show there at the Coliseum, and he literally said one of the main differences when he had the job at West Virginia 17 years ago is December was literally a dead period, and getting new jobs was never a problem. And you could take all day to move your family, and it was nothing. There was really no work to do. Now, there's arguably
48 hours, it seems like,
Well, there's the most work to do. I mean, you can make an argument that outside of coaching the season, you have the spring portal window, you have fall camp, and then you have the December portal window, whichever one you want to put in whatever order. But those are 3 very busy periods. And you can make an argument, George, as a coach today, that you're probably busier in the offseason than in the regular season.
Yes.
Like in the regular season,
Yeah.
you're coaching the game, you're running up the scheme, but in the offseason, you're the CEO and you're stressed out to the gills. So that's where we are right now in this college football landscape, and it's not calming down.
Yeah, the dates are, we needed to shift on the dates there, and as we begin here with college football, we'll touch on a couple of different things. Even with as wild and crazy as it might seem to some, and nobody's really saying this perspective out there, I support this model than what the previous model was, which was we're handshake and a wink and a nod, and everything was done under the cloak of ambiguity and booster and whatever, and we didn't know about it. Now, at least, yeah, is it the Wild West right now? Sure. But that we were still, people seem to fail to realize that, like, we were doing these programs were doing these things in terms of somehow getting money to players, somehow getting gifts
Paying
and goods to
players,
players.
yeah.
Essentially, I don't want to say the entire history of college football, but at least the better part of the last half century of college football, since at least the 70s and 80s,
Right.
as we know, in many places with scandals taken down, such as Southern Methodist and Miami. So it's nothing new in the sport. It's just now so accessible and available to everybody that it's just unregulated. Like many things that when they first get to the market, gambling, the internet, sports betting, anything under the sun, it's a torrent. You get the torrent first. And so eventually regulation is going to come, whether that self-regulation comes from the NCAA. It's funny when you hear the NCAA is down bad right now that they've got to rely on Congress, or they're trying to appeal to Congress to help them with their problems. Another organization, another entity that is not the model of efficiency and well run operation. So that's kind of the it's kind of wild right now. Is what's it going to look like? We don't know, but all of these things that you're seeing that are happening now that people want to bemoan and it's ruining the sport or whatever, they were happening. Y'all just didn't know about it.
Well,
so
the money was
that's
happening.
the difference.
The only difference, though, is what Rich Rodriguez said. The money was happening. He even made a joke that the SEC schools, he said schools down south, they were clearly paying kids in December with a wink and a nod. The difference is you didn't get 4,000 kids, whether they're good or not, in what's called a transfer portal.
Yeah.
And yes, coaches could move jobs, so I get it's now fair. But the transfer portal, George, you could absolutely argue is way more of an issue in terms of that being chaotic than NIL.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Obviously, you want to get paid for your market value. Coaches, programs, boosters, presidents, we're making millions upon millions of dollars, certainly on the star athletes, Johnny Manziel, Tim Tebow, Carmelo Anthony in basketball. Their NIL package would have been off the freaking charts if this existed back then. And as you're saying, many of them now go on shows, some of their own shows, and say they didn't get paid at all, and they're eating mayonnaise sandwiches while they're winning a national title at Syracuse. For the nod to Carmelo there. It's hard for you and I to believe that growing up. It's hard to believe that he wasn't getting some cash. That really is. It's nothing to say that would have been wrong of him when you think about it, where we are now in college sports, and he grew up in humble beginnings. But it's hard to believe a lot of them weren't getting any money. But Fab Five, the money that they were generating for Michigan, you look at all those athletes, so it makes sense, and it is even Pat White, Steve Slayton, what they were generating for WU back then in that heyday. They may not have stayed if there was a transfer portal in NIL because maybe WU couldn't have afforded them, and all the money they were generating, whether directly or indirectly, was helping build buildings at the school. But
increased enrollment too.
Yeah, and increased enrollment. When sports is good, enrollment is good, even though it's two separate bank accounts, which I think confuses some. But when sports is good, so is enrollment. It does work hand in hand. You want sports to be good at a major university like that. But at the same time, because yes, now it's only fair players get paid for their name, image, and likeness. I mean, George, this is not socialism that some were arguing this was going to be when Northwestern kids got together and tried to unionize. The argument this got into Congress where they were arguing this was socialism. It's not. This is not everyone gets $300 a week, and whether you're good, bad, or indifferent, and Johnny Manziel getting the same money as the last guy on the roster. That would have been socialism. That would not have really been fair to the star athlete. What's going on now is complete capitalism. Get ready for the professional world. It's complete capitalism. If you can generate more because you're a better player, you're a star athlete, and you're worth more to a business, to your school, whatever. And NIL is obviously going to change where the schools can even go fully on Front Street rather than have to go through companies like Country Road Trust and collectives. Then cool, you deserve it. So does the coach, so does everybody involved. The issue, though, which I think is why this is the wild, wild west, why this has pushed out coaches, legendary coaches like a Nick Saban, like a Jay Wright in college basketball.
Jim Larniega yesterday.
Of course, just yesterday. And then also, even to a lesser extent, a guy like Chip Kelly that clearly could have been a head coach somewhere, choosing to be an offensive coordinator to get away from this. And the reason why those coaches are saying, I'm kind of done with this, and it's been confirmed. That's the reason Nick Saban, it was too chaotic, too much stress, why he did walk away when he could have potentially dragged out his career longer. And Baker himself, they all have confirmed this, is because of the transfer portal. And I do get the fairness of this, because if a coach, going back to Rodriguez, imagine him telling an athlete, you once a mountaineer, always a mountaineer, and if you leave, you're not a mountaineer anymore, when he left himself to take another job and do the same thing. It's very hypocritical. You look at a lot of fans on social media, a lot of W, and granted, they can replace those players, but a lot of W fans are giving you the once a mountaineer, not always a mountaineer anymore if you're going to leave and not do the whole thing. But they're taking a coach back who did the same thing. So it's hypocritical there. And if coaches can leave, and sometimes they would leave and tell a kid, I'm going to be with you for 4 years, and they would take a better job. And I get it's their career, so they have every right to do so. I get it. But then a player should have the same right. I get that. It is fair. The problem, George, is, and this is the reality, why I see people have more problem with the players doing this. One coach leaving and screwing over a program does not impact the whole dynamic of the landscape of the sport as much as the players doing so. So it wasn't fair before. It was not fair before, but the players having the power versus the coach or program having the power has made it this chaotic. And the real issue here, because the portal's never going to close forever now that they opened it, nor should it, to keep it fair. The portal NIL are here to stay, as they should be, but it is a little bit, I guess, unproductive and almost trying to create chaos by having the portal open before the season's over, because and that's really where the argument is right now. If you want to compare this to the NFL and say college football is basically just a pro league, it's pretty much just the NFL light right now. It's the NFL feeder system. It's its own pro league, one of the top pro leagues in the world. That's what it is now. I agree. But George, when can an NFL player leave his team and go sign with another team and be a free agent? After the season's over, even if they're not a good team and they're not in the playoffs, they can't do it prior. They can talk, obviously, but that movement occurs after the Super Bowl, after the postseason, after the season's over. Same thing in the NBA, same thing in Major League Baseball. They even have a respect thing in MLB. They don't announce signings until the World Series is over, even if there's a wink and a nod. They don't do it. That's been going on forever, whether it be Scott Boras or whatever other agent. They all agree nothing's announced until after the World Series, certainly when it comes to star players. But in college football, George, you're getting announcements of players leaving a team while that team is playing in a bowl game. You're getting announcements of players leaving a team during other games being played. You're having an announcement of a bowl game this team's going to be in, and then seconds later, you're hearing an announcement of a star player opting out or entering the transfer portal, and then some players in the portal are choosing to still play. But I talked to SMU's coach. I did cover the CFP, Penn State SMU for Yardbarker, and he literally said, we talked to the kid. We had him here. They had their backup QB that was still with the team despite being in the portal, and he then later would commit to Northwestern. By the way, George, by the time I walked out of the press conference, he had committed to Northwestern. We walked in, he had not committed yet. But he literally told us, we talked, but he really was never going to play. So, that was a mirage then. Him being there's a mirage. He might as well have left. So you have all of that weirdness. And then I guess to volley it back to you, Nick Saban, for example, again, has brought up the fact that to calm that down, he's not against the NIL, he's not against the portal in general, but you don't open the portal at all until the end of January or February, which February is still kind of an off month before you get into the spring session. Maybe you open up there after bowl season, after the CFP, after the national championship has been crowned, so you don't have any of this mess. At least the portal would not be open. You can do a wink and a nod, but the portal would not be open in December. They could not officially enter it, even if they know they want to leave. Maybe more players would play in a bowl game. We'd at least have less chaos, even if they would still opt out. And then you could still open it up again after the spring session for guys that lose out on jobs, or guys that make a second decision, or maybe something else happens with a coach and then you want out. You got to have the 2 windows, one before spring and one after, but the first one should be after the season, after the CFP, after the national title game. Do you think that makes more sense, or do you want the window to be open early in December before the bowl season, and basically we're just going to have to deal with this chaos?
No, it's got to be, day after, which obviously has been pushed later now because previously they're, in a 4-team system, the playoff,
and it could get pushed again if they have more.
Yeah, exactly. Playoff championship was usually around the 7th or 8th of January, and we were still apparently cruising toward 14 at some point in 2 years. So, but no, it's got to come after the end of the. I could almost, maybe if you could get away with slotting it between the semifinals and the championship. Obviously not fair per se to
you'd have a star player opt out if you did that, though. You'd have a Pribilov, for example, probably would do that before the national title game. And that could
but then at least it's, we're only going to affect 2 teams, and if you're on a team and you're playing in the national championship and you're thinking about leaving anyway, I don't think you guys winning the national championship or losing the national championship is going to change your mind if you've already given enough thought to, I want to enter the portal when the season ends, whenever the portal opens. So I slot it somewhere between, because if you slotted it between, and to your point about, semester starting and everything like that, for like place like West Virginia, a little bit earlier because of the way the calendar is. Maryland's got a super long break. They got like till the 21st, and some other programs, Ohio State, some programs are on quarters, as opposed to
part of the issue, though, because if you wait until too long with when your semester starts, it can actually hurt your eligibility. That's why players had to bounce out, even though some were saying just figure it out. You can't do that.
As it currently stands, I'm looking for a date between like January 8th and January 20th, which I think can still get you, when the portal would.
I could even compromise and have it not open until the start of the CFP, but you don't open it prior in early December for any of those bowls. So maybe you at least, granted, we could have a whole nother conversation on maybe getting rid of those bowls, but you and I both know that with money, with TV revenue, and let's be real, George, as much as even West Virginia fans, especially when you knew you already were getting a new coach, nobody really cared about the Frisco Bowl and watching West Virginia play Memphis, win or lose. Nobody really cared about it. What I will tell you is the networks will come back and say, on a Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern time, what else is on? Not much else. We're on an NBA, kind of, funk period still early in the season. Nothing else is going to be there. The NFL does not touch Tuesday, even though they got every other day. So that's still the highest rating thing you could put on, is 2 average teams playing in a mediocre bowl game on that Tuesday night in early December. That is the best option. So as long as that's the best for TV ratings and there's money there, and you don't want to have 100+ teams have basically exhibition seasons where there's no chance at anything, you're going to have bowls. But if you can't get rid of the bowls, I would maybe open it maybe at the start. I would rather do your thing in January. I'd rather do January 21st, even after the CFP. But if you have to open it up earlier than what you're saying, even into January, and you must open it up into December for whatever reason, then I would at least like the CFP to get underway. So we're at least into December 20th for a better number than December 1st. December 1st basically makes it impossible for anyone to have any focus in their bowl game, for these players to not leave. It screws the CFP. Again, if Penn State has Drew Aller get hurt, it'll come into play and it'll be a conversation, because this is a backup quarterback that logged several snaps every game and is a dual threat that was different. And it's not just Pribula. It happened with several other players too. Some stayed and some did not.
And to your point about the free
later
agency,
December at best.
Yeah, and to your point about the free agency aspect, I think in the NFL, I think it can mirror that in some ways. Where, listen, if you're a guy and your season ends like Maryland's did or any other team that final week of Thanksgiving, then you do the thing where I intend to enter the transfer portal. Obviously, it's not official, but you can do the same thing where you can announce your intention, and then when the portal window opens, people like kind of fail to realize when we talk about
players
portal.
do that. I've had players mentor 2 months and announce their
Yeah.
intention 2 months before.
Yeah, Maryland had a tight end guy that
The difference now is though they announce and then the next day the damn thing's open. Now in December,
Yeah,
that's what
correct,
happened.
correct, yeah.
Everyone announced,
And yeah,
you know,
and
when,
for people
when
like
Brown
that
got
think,
fired,
you
and
know,
the
just
next day
regular
it's
people
open.
listening, it's a literal website. You go on and you put players input in their name, where they're from, how many years of schooling they've had, all that type of stuff, how much eligibility they have remaining, and it is a literal portal that is viewable to coaches and
Yeah, it's not just a
and,
tweet. You need to actually put it in somewhere. By the way, people also think, "Oh, the guy tweeted, so it's over."
No, yeah, that's what
because
I'm saying.
there are
So you
times,
get,
and this has happened too, where a player announced their intentions, and before they entered, they came out and said, "I changed my mind. I want to go back." Or even when they're in the portal, people also get confused.
Oh yeah, you can remove yourself from the portal. Yeah,
I have covered numerous players
not
that
binding.
entered the portal and then came back to WVU because they went to the portal, they tested their value, and it wasn't good enough. George, I think part of the issue here now is the way this is set up, and I don't know if this was the intention for it, because the intention was to give them freedom, not have to have them sit out, make it fair. If coach can leave, you can leave. But here's the issue with the portal, separate from just the window chaos.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a disadvantage of entering. You could be a star player that the team is going to be locked into you in the future. You could be on a good team. You could be on a bad team. You could be a backup. You could be a starter. You could be any kind of player from one all the way down to the last player on the roster. As we're talking about, entering the portal does not mean you're gone. And yeah, there are some coaches that may be old school, and if you enter, you know, you're dead to me, but it's hard to operate in that system anymore. It basically is impossible. So if the coach is not like that, most coaches in the world, and you enter, you can come back. So entering does not mean you're gone. So why not enter? If I'm an athlete, or I'm some, you know, I have a kid who's an athlete, I would absolutely tell them, why not enter every freaking offseason, test your value. Certainly if you had a better year, maybe if you had a worse year, you don't, but certainly if you had a better year, George, you know what? It's very similar to like LeBron James did this his whole career. It's the player option thing. What you do is, if you have a player option, you let it linger. You let it linger. You make your franchise sweat, and then at the last minute, you decide to maybe pull the trigger on that, or you say, no, I'm not going to pick it up. Doesn't mean I want to leave, but I want a new deal because now I'm all of a sudden better than I was before. You can enter the portal, test your value. If you like it, you go elsewhere. If you don't like it, you come back. That's the problem with it, though, because that's where it's different than sports free agency, where people are freaking out and sending death threats to these players. And this is a literal thing because they announced they're entering a portal, what doesn't even mean they're gone and they can come back. And I think the way this is being received, people give me flack sometimes for attacking the fans, but I got to tell you, George, the way college football now is, especially football, even more than basketball, I hate to say it, but you almost need to consume it with some intelligence, because you can't assume everyone who enters is gone. You can't assume everything you read on social media is accurate. You can't assume. You cannot assume. And there's too much assuming going on, and it creates even more chaos. There was misreporting during this December portal. That's why this portal in December this year was crazier than ever before. Ever before. And I don't know how you calm it down unless you move the window. Otherwise, you might as well get rid of the bowl games. But it even would be hard for teams trying to reboot things and get a fix to their program, like say West Virginia was doing. But yeah, I mean, if Mike Locksley doesn't have a 7-win season next year and they fire him, buckle your seatbelt for a portal craziness, because it's not even about whether the program's good or not. When there's a coaching change, you're going to have portal craziness. Yes. I don't know why. George, help me understand this. Every single time a West Virginia player announces they're entering a portal, I get a text from somebody that we know, a myriad of people, saying, oh my God, I'm freaking out. I can't believe they lost that guy. And I'm saying to myself, you are the same person. And I agree, the era of Brown had to end. But if you want a coach fired, this is what it is like. This comes with the territory. The thoughts of grandeur that you're going to fire a coach and then all the players are going to say, oh, I'm thrilled, I hated that guy, which is not the case at all, and that everyone's going to stay, plus you're just going to add and lose no one, is a fallacy to reality. And it would not even happen at Alabama. It didn't even happen at Alabama. When Nick Saban retired, they lost their top recruits in the portal, George. That's why they weren't as good the next year. That's why they're in this situation where they lose a few games, but they're still obviously great, but they're not a playoff team. Like, they took a dip too. They got screwed in a couple recruiting classes. They lost the player to the portal they wanted to keep. Saban complained about it on game day. It's all because he left. It's all because he left. They wouldn't have done it if he was there. So if it's going to happen to Bama, it's going to happen to West Virginia. And obviously the player you're mad about was on a 6-7 team if you include the bowl loss. But the reality is players go to schools for a coach and money. And if everyone can pay, because now there's revenue share, which, yes, will help West Virginia, for example, but it doesn't mean that everyone else can't pay too. You can get money somewhere, especially if you have value. And if you lose your coach, you lose your system, and you have a new guy coming in with a different system, you're going to want to test your value. Some may come back. Most will leave. But that's part of the territory that I do think the common fan is not getting. When, if this was 5 years ago, oh, I want the coach fired. Yeah, maybe I'll take a rough year to get it going. And then, we'll have the same roster because the players are screwed into it and they just got to figure it out. And, after the Rich Rod left, that whole roster had to deal with Bill Stewart for a few years with guys who had eligibility because that's just how it was. Rich Rod recruited Noah Devine, but he had to play under Bill Stewart for most of his career because Rich Rod left, and that's just how it is. George, in that exact scenario, Noel would have transferred. 100% full stop, not even close to any other option.
Maximizes upper, yep. Mm-hmm.
I literally have heard it from him. So, come on. Now, maybe you get the reverse, and a guy like Steve Slayton has also said to me that if he was getting NIL deals in college, he would not have entered the NFL draft. He would have played in that last year with Pat White. So maybe that's a benefit to you. But it all comes with the territory, and I do think it feels like the way this is consumed is people just get bamboozled with news, and every time I hear it, I'm just like, I figured this. There's no surprise here at all.
With news.
No. I mean, I don't understand. Why? What? Help me there. Why is there a confusing bamboozlement going on? Every single player goes in the portal. It's like they're losing their child. Why is that? I mean, I don't know if it's hard for people to get to this new era of college sports, but you cannot get attached to players in this era. Cannot.
If you worked at a company and you worked for a boss and your person that your boss is the one that hired you, and
I've used this.
They said, hey, really appreciate you and value, and they're kind of the reason you took the job, and then that person is no longer the boss for whatever the reason.
Fired.
Either by their own volition of choosing that they no longer want to be your boss, or
I think fired's worse because the vibe is clearly your guy we don't want.
Then should you have to stay and work for the new guy when you don't know how the new guy's going to be and the new guy didn't hire you?
George,
it's really the same situation, right?
Would you do it? Would I do it? Would any of our friends do it? If your recruiter, if your mentor in a job gets fired, you like the guy, you don't feel comfortable with anybody else, it's now going to be a whole new mentality in there. And George, you didn't add, and another place is going to pay you a lot of money, potentially even more money. Why not go? So these players and coaches, this is all a business for everyone. This is not just a business for the coaches anymore. This is a business for the players. It's a business for everybody. It is their job more than it is any loyalty.
And not that those players will have a guarantee of having their same role or whatever elsewhere. But listen, the closest real world example I can give to you is Congress, where I worked for 7 years. And in one of the scenarios, the gentleman that was the chairman of my committee lost his reelection. There's reelections every 2 years. And so then everybody is suddenly thrown into a tizzy, like, well, we're going to keep our jobs. They're going to stay over. And some people start to actively, I wish I had a transfer portal to be like, all right, let me go ahead and, but it's just, you got to apply for other jobs and maybe you get lucky and maybe you don't. But thankfully the next coach, the next chairman that came in kept many of us on. Some people left, but the new chairman, who was a woman, kept most of the people on, and so that was supportive. But
I mean, we're based on the reports right now. Blaine Stewart and Chad Scott are welcome to come back, but Matt Moore goes to Virginia Tech. I mean, Rich Rod does not have their personal relationships with all these guys that Neil Brown did. I think it's an utter miracle the two of the members of the staff could be coming back.
Yeah.
So, I mean, quite frankly, and I'll tell you that I know one of them was not originally in the plan, and I do believe is a part of recruiting one of those running backs. Let me get you can figure out who that guy is. So those decisions are continuously made, of course, but I know people that do a lot of work. And George, you mentioned the early signing day right after the news of this, and for example, West Virginia not having a coach during the signing day. I think there should be more respect paid to the fact that low-level staff members who are not, say, a coordinator or a head coach, who are just recruiting staff members all the way down from recruiting director on down. They got a top 40 class with likely no job, and they put it together for another coach.
Yes.
And I know for a fact they have no security of working into January 1. Right now they're getting paid, but January 1 hits and the whole Ren Baker will do right by you, you do right by me is gone because their contracts are gone. Some will be back, some will not. I hope they all freaking stay because I like working with them. But they did a good job in recruiting. If it was me, and maybe this is just my personality, I would have said, "Oh, you want me to text that four-star athlete again? You know, lock it up. Let me do a fake text because you're going to fire me in a few weeks. Why am I doing?
Why would you put the effort in? Yeah.
Yeah, why put there really is no point. And the fact that they did, and things aren't even worse than they are now, but you have to understand this can go on. And George, kind of to segue to where we are in the playoff, part of what got Indiana in a program that won 3 bowl games in their entire history, managed to make the CFP, regardless of whether you think they legitimately should be there or not, but they did get in. They had a great year. Kirk Cinetti in year 1 put them there, is because they turned over an entire roster. They did it with a whole new coaching staff. They had to flip 30 plus players they brought in, and most of that work happened in the spring, so you're still going to see a lot of that work in West Virginia, but that was the case. That's what needs to happen when you get a new coaching staff in. That's how you win right away. Some of the benefit, I think people forget, George, the transfer portal works both ways.
Yeah.
Every single time I would get a text, how can we lose that player? I would then reply with a link to an article I wrote about a player that committed to come to West Virginia. So it works both ways. You're going to see exits. You're going to see players coming and going. And I get that is annoying for the fans, but that is where we are now, and it's not going away. So if you don't adapt and adjust, you're just going to literally be really irate like pretty much every December, which I don't think is good for anyone's mental health. But
This
I
is
do
why
think
I
to
don't.
calm it down, you would at least move the portal window to January. You'd fix the backup situation for CFP teams. I think you would at least respect the bowl games. I also think you would make this a little less chaotic because I don't think it would affect their lives too much if they're in January instead of December, if everybody is there, even with semester differences. So I do think the way the portal window is creates this problem or exacerbates this problem. But again, it's just fair now where it wasn't fair to the players before. I get they have more power and it's run amok, and maybe you do need contracts and a buyout and all of that. And I don't know how that would work legally because I broach this every time and no one has an answer. If you put them all on contracts and say they're all employees, then anyone who's in that facility more than 40 hours got to get some health care based on our current system. And that is pretty hard. Everyone's going to go broke. You're paying everyone's health care. So NIL is a name, image, and likeness, and it's a little different ballgame than contracts. We will see where we go. I do think if you just move the window away from December 1 and move it to January 1 even, which still is not the end of the CFP, that would fix this exponentially. I don't think it would make it not chaotic. I don't think it would make it not the Wild Wild West 100%, but it would really reduce the chaos. It would make my life way easier covering it. And I think teams that do change coaching staffs would also have an easier time adjusting and having that new staff come into play, and you wouldn't necessarily have this chaos, even if it works out and it's fine for you, like the Indiana example, and it could be fine for West Virginia because there's a whole nother portal window that people keep forgetting about. But I do think the window is just creating this chaos, and I don't know how anyone didn't think this through ahead of time, or else they didn't give a damn. But they're now complaining about it. But moving the window, I do think would absolutely be the number one thing that needs to happen here to calm any of this down, because the chaotic news absolutely trumped the CFP, even though you had the first ever 12-team playoff in existence, but those games weren't great, which we'll get into here in a moment. And then you had all this chaos going on. The headline stories on the sites was transfer portal stuff, much more than the gameplay. So if you move it 1 month, I think you'd at least fix that a little bit for perception.
NCAA never a good organization for foresight. And then that's also too where this happens in tennis a lot, because in tennis you've got, the ATP and the WTA, or the men's and women's tours, that kind of govern how the season goes.
Yeah.
But then the Grand Slams, which are the premier tournaments 4 times a year, 4 different places across the world, are run by their own entities in their countries. USTA, for example, runs the US Open.
I was going to see boxing's even a better example, because there's so many organizations that control these belts that nobody knows who any of that is.
So in this context, the NCAA runs the season. They run championships in football at the 2 and 3 and the AA levels and everything else,
right.
and they don't run the championship at the FBS level.
Yeah, I mean,
because
you could even
that's run by a loose confederation of bowls that are kind of run by the same organization / ESPN, and then the college football playoff, which is organized by the conferences and also / ESPN. So there we are.
And George, I mean, not to defend the NCAA, but it's such a train wreck that what you're saying people think is just the case now. I could make a case here that I don't even think is a hot take.
Okay.
If you go back 100+ years in the history of college football, you could make an argument, and we were talking about this actually, myself and some colleagues, when we were covering that CFP game in State College, that literally before now, maybe before 2014 when you started the 14 playoff, even though that was a little bit rougher because you obviously weren't allowing as many teams, but you want to go then, maybe you certainly can go now. Prior to that, literally all of the arguments that exist about who should claim what and what championship is valid or not, all fallacies, and literally every championship prior to 2014, maybe even prior to 2024, is a mythical title. Everyone in all capacities. I'm going Notre Dame all the way down. I'm talking. I'm being serious.
People seem to fail to realize that in the history of the sport, there really hasn't been a good way that has yet been devised to figure out how to crown its champion.
If we were talking from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and I'm not even exaggerating this, both of us, having covered the sport long enough and being the football writers and AP votes and all of that stuff, literally would have been qualified to crown a national champion that not only we could have as our opinion of the HBS champion, but literally, George, some of those selectors were just media members that wrote a magazine that crowned champions for, say, 5 years. And after you did it for a period of time, they crowned you a major selector. We talked about here how we've been on the HBS in 2011. If we, from 2011 on, and say maybe even the last 5 years when both our professional careers really got rolling, and certainly knee deep in college sports, just these 5 years, if we would have done this in these 5 years and called it the HBS selector, literally, if this was 1944, they would have had to been forced to crown this a major selector, and we would have been literally crowning a national champion, not even just for the purpose of the show, but in literally speaking reality. That is where it was for decades upon decades.
The AP has been selecting a national champion for the past 80 years. Since
I was meaning before that, though. I was meaning before that, before the AP got involved.
Before that, we're just matching numbers next to each other and seeing how it looks, and then guessing.
It was literally media members. They went back. Some of this is retroactively. There are some champions that say they won in 1936, for example. Mm-hmm. They did not claim that title until 3 decades later. Some of these titles have been retroactive. I can confirm West Virginia's basketball national championship did not exist when we were in college. 5 years ago, they claimed it. 5 years ago, they claimed it. They put it on the banner there. There's a little NCAA document. I mean, I don't know what changed in the period of time, and I'm not even saying they shouldn't have claimed it, because if everyone else is doing it, you should too. I could argue about a football one too, but that's my hope. I mean, there, George, when within a decade period, you can change who was a champion that didn't previously exist as a champion. Does that not immediately tell you, well, this is a farce? I mean, this is just ridiculous. And you have some years, if you go back 60, 70 years, I'm not even exaggerating this. There are some years that there are 6 national champions in the same year. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, it's almost like if you have 3 quarterbacks, you have none. If you have 6 national champions, you have none. No one's a champion if you have 6 national champions. It really takes away the luster, George. Imagine standing there on a podium and you got 5 of the guys, and they're not below you. They're on level playing field. That's just ludicrous. It's asinine. That's what the sport was doing. So now there is a playoff, which is at least closer to that. But George, even in the midst of the playoff format, you had UCF trying to claim a title, which I don't think is legit. SIDs don't think is legit. The national media doesn't think is legit. The NCAA doesn't think is legit, but they put it on their press box anyway. So you have
the old days.
You have just and George, I was just again in State College. I literally had somebody ask me. I'm sitting there, and Tim Collishaw was next to me, so he can support this. Somebody literally asked, I'm looking around here. Why does Penn State have like 9 dates on the press box across? Like, what does that mean? I know the Paterno couple titles, and some want to argue some from 100 years ago, but there's like 9 over here, and you have literally the answer is they consider it special seasons. That 94 have a Big Ten title there.
Yeah.
Well, they have 94, but they don't claim that as a national title.
Yeah, 94, they were not crowned the national champion, but I think they were undefeated or had a tie.
No, they were undefeated. They won the bowl game and all that, but they just didn't get.
But they did not get it. But they were not the national champ. I believe it was Nebraska that year.
Yeah, it was Nebraska, 100%.
Yeah, but they claim they don't claim that as a nut. Yeah, but
no, but this is what I'm talking about, George. So they were undefeated, including a bowl win. They do not claim it as a national champion. How is that different than UCF claiming 2017 when they were undefeated with a bowl win with a worse strength of schedule? They do claim it. They do claim it.
We were undefeated. It was fun.
The Cauley Matrix the Cauley Matrix that they claim it off of, which is the only thing that gave them the one ranking. Do you know another? I'm going to give you a year here that people would just have their mind blown.
Okay.
So you remember the national title game between Alabama and Notre Dame?
Yes.
I believe it was 2013.
Mm-hmm.
The one Manti Te'o was in, and now he's a part of Netflix's crew there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after that game was over, Alabama won by like 30 points, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Cauley Matrix in their infinite wisdom, this is the exact same selector that claims UCF is one when nobody else, including the AP coaches, nothing says they are. Claimed, I'm not even exaggerating here, you can look this up, claimed that Alabama and Notre Dame should share the national championship. Now, Notre Dame didn't, to Notre Dame's credit, they did not claim it because that's insane. But that's where we are as a sport. And that was obviously prior to the playoff, and you even had a computer system with the BCS. So the point is, we've had such chaos going on prior to the portal, prior to NIL, whether it be right in front of your eyes or behind closed doors. We've never really crowned a true champion. So we're here about, I do want to debate a little bit on the CFP currently, and if Indiana and SMU and those teams should have been in there, or how we fix it in the future. But I just want to get this out that where we are now is at least a path to maybe crown something fairly and give you a direct option of what you know is a path to get in. Whereas before, nothing was ever defined, and you could absolutely argue they all were mythical titles. I mean, whether it be basketball, football, or whatever, it's all mythical. There's nothing to say that one of the years that Pitt claims, George, in 1934, and they have one legit one in 76, they claim a bunch more, which is just ludicrous. But one of the years they claim from way back in 1934, I don't know why I have this memorized, but I do. In that year, they had one loss. Okay. Great season. They had one loss. They lost to Minnesota. Minnesota beat them head to head. Minnesota finished undefeated. Minnesota claimed a national championship 30 years later, retroactively, because they went undefeated that season, right? Okay. They had a head-to-head win over the number 2 team in the country, in Pitt. Still a great team, but number 2. Pitt, in the early 70s, decades later, I'm not even joking, claimed that season as a national championship and did not dispute in the document that Minnesota also should get a share. So Pitt claims that Minnesota should get a share of a national championship in which they had a better record and beat them head to head. How in the world of anybody who is a sound mind would then say Pitt should claim the national championship that year? They're clearly the number 2 team in the country. I get being the number 2 team in the country would be rough, and you want to be the number 1 team in the country. Everyone's experienced being number 2, and you want to be number 1. But when you're number 2 and you're still damn good and you're not number 1, you can't just go ahead and say, you know what, I was close. Let me just claim it anyway. Let me just claim it anyway. That's what they did. So it just, like, that is the worst example I can give you, but there's many others, and there's not just Pitt. There's some of Notre Dame's, some of Alabama's, for crying out loud, are mythical. Oklahoma could claim about 4 or 5 more. They don't even claim all the ones they could have, but they have the 7, but they could have more, and then they would be mythical too. But it's just, and you had shared titles again, as you mentioned, they were with Nebraska and Michigan shared in 97. Michigan's title last year was the first one they had on their own in 60 years because they shared the one with Nebraska. Shared titles, AP, coaches poll doing different things. USC had that experience in the early 2000s. That's just all ludicrous. It's all ludicrous. And as we've talked about before on this show, and I still do think this would be helpful to get rid of any of this, you don't have any CFP rankings at all until the end of the season, and you get rid of the AP poll. I love to get a vote. Love it. I hear it. It's great. I already, people want to give it to me next year. Cool. Get rid of the damn thing. I don't want it. Shouldn't be gone. There's no point of it. The only point of it is to crown a champion that you disagree with what is going on in reality. And then that doesn't leave you with anything other than what I'm complaining about here. It just is
BC
further of a mess. So
the
that's where
BCS
we
was an
should-
idea ahead of its time.
That's where we should be. If you did the BCS with the playoff idea, so you did the BCS
Yes.
you did with 12 teams,
Yeah.
that would be where you need to go. If
because
you do the
it's
BCS with
it's
just
adding
2
in
teams,
all
then I
of
would
those things.
disagree.
It's accounting for all the people. It's accounting for the computers. It's accounting for strength of schedule. It spits out a number.
But if you do the BCS with just 2 teams, it doesn't work. You need to
Correct.
go more teams.
Yeah. Spits out a number to the 10,000th or whatever in the decimal point. And then
Yeah, there was. I saw somebody on Twitter, and I wanted to reply, but I didn't want to argue about this for all day. But they literally said the way to fix SMU in Indiana isn't it? Wouldn't it be great if we had a computer system to rank and include strength of schedule as part of it? I'm like, we had it. It was a BCS. We got rid of it, and then we
too much.
We literally had it, and yes, then you would. And I do think it would be a different 12 teams if you went back to where the BCS was.
The irony about the BCS and why we didn't embrace expansion before, and of course this is pre all the conference chaos, but those bowls wanted to hold on to their identity. So the BCS was a plus one game
automatic bid
in the later stages.
Rose Bowl, Big Ten,
the national. We initially rotated
Mm-hmm.
it between the 4 prestigious ones, then +1, then turned into the New Year's Six, and now the New Year's Six has essentially lost its value because they're only merely semifinals at this point. So And so what the people, the bowl administrators were afraid of has happened anyway, and they have less of a say now because the conferences and the television.
Yeah, I mean the NCAA doesn't really have a say. The conferences are running things. The portal and players have more of a say than ever before, and it's just chaotic and a mess. But a lot of what is happening now was happening before. But I do think the portal window would fix it all. But to reality of what is occurring here in the year of our Lord 2024 is we're going to go into 2025 here on the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show as we're talking a lot of college football chaos that we've been covering the last several weeks. You had a 12-team playoff this year that is in existence. They're trying to finally crown a true champion that would be somewhat fair. Nothing's 100%. Everyone can't play everybody when you have 130 teams, but this will be much closer than a media member 100 years ago just guessing on who they think is the best team. Because by the way, George, those media members back then were not watching West Coast games. They weren't watching all the games. We at least could have that ability now.
Arguably, we're better informed. Yes,
we're certainly more well informed. But you get a playoff now that has a lot of blowouts early on. You have teams that didn't really beat anybody to get there. You have non-blue bloods and SMU. First year as a Power 4 getting in. They got shellacked. Indiana, 3 bowl wins in their program history. That's a basketball school. They get in right away with Kirk Sonetti, and then they get blown out. He lies about their schedule, but they didn't actually beat anybody. For you, did the CFP get it right in terms of the teams that were in? Is what happened an indictment of who got in a way, and how could this be fixed? Because even if you are okay with the format and the teams that are there, it's hard to also deny that by going to 12, going to 14, going to 16, you're going to have some teams with some relatively easy schedules that do get in the CFP. Indiana, SMU, again, they didn't really beat anybody, but I do still could argue they deserve to be there. Does that bother you? The teams are skating by, even if they deserve to get into the playoffs.
No,
and then
they
get it right in who got in.
Welcome to mega conferences. Welcome to the 18-team Big Ten. Welcome to the 12-team, to the 16-team SEC. Here's something funny, SEC. If you had stayed at 14 teams and left Texas and Oklahoma back in the Big 12 and didn't take them, granted they wanted to leave the Big 12, but let that be bygone. If I'd left both of those teams back in the Big 12, 2 things happen. A, Texas isn't your high up representative, one of your representatives in the playoff, which paves the way for Alabama, who would only have 2 losses because they wouldn't have played Oklahoma. And hell, probably Ole Miss gets in too, for the aforementioned reason that I just said that Texas wouldn't be in, or South Carolina. And I get that South Carolina lost to those teams. If everybody keeps doing the best thing.
And you would have still had Texas or Oklahoma as the conference champion back in the Big 12. One of them would still got in.
One of them would have been in.
Not both of them is probably what they would argue back, that not both of them.
One of them, and then it knocks Arizona State out of the thing. We'll sub that in there.
So that would be the argument counter, is that you did get a non-blue blood like an Arizona State in that they never otherwise would get in. And that's why people argue there's a path for West Virginia now, because if you win the conference, you're in. Whereas before it was kind of more cattywampus. And even going back to the BCS, even though you had the automatic bids for the BCS games, they were very often taking the 1 versus 2 in the as SEC teams because of strength of schedule, which is why they won so many titles, and even the Big Ten mixed in there. You probably would still get that at the top, But yes, it would be different.
Yeah,
The schedules would be
I'm
different. You would absolutely, the SEC would have been helped for sure because you would be removing Texas from the equation.
Yeah, I'm sick of the deserving argument. It's we're ranking the committee is and granted there are things that the committee can improve on. We're very vague, and in Ward Manuel's term, who's the athletic director of Michigan, it was Bill Hancock before him, who was another AD. Ward Manuel's term is done, so there'll be a new athletic director, and next year's.
I do like that, by the way. It should cycle.
Oh, 100%, it should rotate, but. All we're asking for is whenever they gather and however they and the selectors rotate who have been on the committee, people, Condoleezza Rice has been on the committee, ex-coach has been on the committee. I think Barry Alvarez is on the committee once. So different people,
is on the
people you've heard of, some people you probably haven't heard of in terms of administrators and whatever across the nation. Good. It's a good eclectic mix of a lot of different people. Yeah. But generally anything like this has an idea of parameters. And I'm willing to say that for these SEC and other folks that were just very vague on what the parameters are. And people ask,
well, when they give them, they also go hypocritical and they do the opposite. Even if they give the parameter on a show for some reason, then they'll go and do the opposite thing. So if you give a parameter,
or they'll contort the parameter to be what they want it to be. Right. So if we write these things down on paper and be like, these are the things we are going to consider, and just like, well, we consider. So to that end, the one thing, none of those SEC teams should have handle your business. It just means more. Apparently, it didn't in Nashville when you lost to Vanderbilt, and it didn't mean more when shitty ass Oklahoma team.
Yeah, they weren't a good Oklahoma team.
Held you to 3 points.
Right,
held you and your preseason Heisman Trophy favorite to 3 points. Right. GTFO, get out of here with that. And if I'm arguing, South Carolina was the bet played, in my opinion. Eye test. I'm throwing out. I know they lost. I know they lost 3 games. All of them lost 3 games, including Carolina. South Carolina lost those other 2 teams. South Carolina at the end of the season was playing their best was playing better football than Alabama and Ole Miss. I'd have stuck them in. But that's just me. If I was going to be somebody that sticks them in. But no, the committee is tasked to rank the teams 1 through 25. That's the other thing. We're not just getting 1 through 12. They rank 1 through 25 until the playoff people and the organizing structure tell them not to do that. So we're ranking them 1 through 25.
I would love I think they should stop, to be honest with you. There's no point of being 22nd in the country.
Which kind of goes to your point, which I'm kind of inclined to agree with, that
you can do, even if you want to do the top 25 in the CFP, there's no point of Associated Press.
I'm with you. Maybe 3 rankings. I don't need them starting at week 8.
Yeah, right.
Give me 1 before rivalry week, which is the
but it's not even rivalry week for half the country.
I know, but that traditionally
seriously, it isn't, because
then F the name, Mike. Then week 13, whatever it is, week 14 of the college football season. So give me a poll for week 14. I won't use the name rivalry week then. Give me a poll for week 14, which is the final week of the regular season, just so I got an idea. Give me a poll before conference championship week.
Yeah, and you probably need 1 more before that for TV. I'll give him 1 more before that for TV.
So 4. But to your point, they're going way too
9. There does not need to be 8. There doesn't need to be 7.
No. It starts week 8. So there's however many that is. 9, 10, 11, 12.
I mean, any number that's less than what it is, I'll take.
Any number that's less than what it is.
It does not need to be as many. Well, I mean, we does not need to be what it is now. But I think what the issue really is, George.
But to your point,
do you want the best or do you want the deserving? It depends on what you want.
Yeah, no, it's rank them and slot them in is how they're doing it now. No, again, if it's best, then we're just picking. If it's best, then I don't even need the ranking.
No, you don't even need to play the season.
Yeah.
No, and you know what's a perfect example? This will go the NFL. So the NFL does obviously a playoff thing. They've been doing a playoff format forever. It's always the best team does not always win a championship, but it is who gets hot. You get hot in the postseason. Both of Eli Manning's rings weren't the best team those years. They got hot. I will die on the grave that the New England Patriots in 07 were a much better team if you're looking at body of work and schedule or who's on the team and who's entertaining and the better players than the Giants were that year. George, Bill Belichick's in college football now. If you asked him on his dying grave, I bet you, and who's the best team you ever coached, I'm sure he would say the 2007 Patriots. They didn't win a championship, but so you haven't always been crowning the best. You've been crowning the teams that just make the playoffs. They do their work. They win their games. They go through a regular season, and then they get there and they get hot. That's what pro sports have always been crowning throughout the history of pro sports. Really, you could argue the best teams don't always win, but the perfect example this year is, and this is off my eye test. If we're doing an eye test in the NFL and not going off record at all and not worrying about playing the games, and you want star power and TV ratings, there's one team I would put in my playoff, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals with Joe Burrow. They have looked offensively. Burrow was putting MVP numbers up the first half of the year. They were lighting people up offensively. Their defense was not great, obviously. They would blow games at the end with different stupid mistakes oftentimes. Yeah. They should easily have about 3 or 4 more wins, right?
If they can't lose in September.
No. Well, what I'm saying is that if you're doing Kurt Herbstreit's CFP and you're saying I want to take the best, and you're even doing Tim Tebow saying we got to do it for TV ratings, would you not take Joe Burrow and the Bengals over, say, the Houston Texans, who are going to win a bad division? I mean, if we're choosing those teams, the Texans lost 31-2. You don't want them, but if they win the division, they're going to get in. But the Bengals are not going to be in, despite if the Bengals and Texans play head-to-head tomorrow. Who do you think's winning the way these teams are? Probably the Bengals, but they lost games earlier in the year to ruin that. And my main issue here for this year's argument is, this is really the crux of this. I'm all about strength of schedule. I do think schedules are not fair. I don't even think the conference schedules are fair. I don't think there's any way anyone can argue that they are. I do think Indiana and SMU kind of skated by, and they literally combined for no major win. Indiana had nothing of note most of the year. So I do hear that argument. But my issue with it being discussed this year, what Nick Saban said, what Kurt Herbstreit said, what Tim Tebow said, what anyone in the SEC camp, what Paul Feinbaum said about, well, you want to have strength of schedule involved, and Alabama's out of conference schedule, and Alabama this, and SEC this, and SEC is a better conference. George, I think we both would agree the SEC is a better conference. They do have a tougher road to go. They've proven that for the last 20 years, even if you think this year it's down. But as you brought up earlier, this is the worst year to make that argument. If we're talking a couple years ago, I hear you. Alabama had the loss to Georgia. Maybe you lost to Ole Miss. They run through everybody else. If that was the season and you're sitting there saying Alabama, like, for example, George, if everything you said is valid, Indiana was undefeated with an Ohio State loss, and Alabama had 2 losses to, say, Georgia and Ole Miss, even though they're not a CFP team, I could then debate with you that might be tougher than Indiana having no quality wins if Bama had a quality win because they played more ranked teams. That's a legit debate then. But what happened this year here in reality, in the year of our Lord 2024, in the season of our Lord 2024 on earth, is Bama did not lose to quality teams. They had a loss to a Vanderbilt team that had a better year than normal, but they're certainly not a CFP team.
They lost to quality teams they'd have been in.
They lost to Oklahoma, who barely made a bowl eligibility this
and Vanderbilt
year.
For the first time in a half century.
If Alabama had a loss to a top 5 team and that was it, or they even had 2 losses to top 5 or top 10 teams like they've had in the past, I truly believe this, George. If Alabama had 2 losses to 2 top 5 or top 10 teams, and Indiana had 1 loss to Ohio State, they would have still got in. Because they would have said you had a harder schedule, you beat better teams, and you're in the SEC. And I could actually sit here and say, I get being annoyed by the SEC, but they did have a harder schedule. Problem is, they lost to average teams, so they ruined their own year. They can blame themselves for their issue. Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin tweeting all day. He's very funny on Twitter or on X, but he also lost to, what was it, Kentucky? He had a bad loss this year.
The only SEC team Kentucky beat this year was Ole Miss.
You can't lose to Kentucky, who's an average program year in and year out, and then say that you should be in the CFP when Indiana's only losses to Ohio State. Now, I get they didn't beat anybody, but again, you ruined it yourself by who you lost to, and then you have more than 1 loss on top of that.
Nobody wants to point out either these SEC people when they like to make their arguments. They're only playing 8 league games. So that gives them 4 chances to stack the schedule in their favor with lesser opponents.
But I do like that in a way, though. That's my hard argument of West Virginia.
Yes. Well, I don't know. It's what you want West Virginia to do. I get it. And listen, Western Kentucky, Alabama played Mercer. Wisconsin, and Wisconsin was a bad year. Okay, so they scheduled a P4, good for them. But the classic SEC schedule, sometime in November, is stacked with a cupcake, random-ass Georgia Southern or Mercer or Wofford or Elon or somebody in there that's a game that should be played in August, not in November, and they use that to pad their schedule. Sure. They're only playing 8 league games, and it's going to be funny, Mike, when in the next year or two, because Indiana's schedule is what it is.
Yeah, because I want to just make it clear to everybody.
Maryland played a tougher schedule than Indiana. Maryland had to go to Oregon. Maryland played Penn State. Who's the other team they played?
West Virginia played a tougher schedule than Indiana, 100%. Big 12 not nearly as good.
And so that's just kind of the cycle of how this works. Indiana was in Maryland's division. Yeah, Indiana was in Maryland's division, had to play Ohio State, was in Maryland's division, and like Maryland had to play Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State every year, and Michigan State. Now, non-division thing, so Big Ten's got 18 teams. It's a round-robin thing. I get it. Everybody will play everybody once every 3 years or whatever it is. But I believe at some point in time, we will be talking in the next year or two about an SEC team that has played an easier SEC schedule because Oklahoma's had a bad year and Vanderbilt's had a bad. Now when you have 16 teams SEC, back in the 14-team model, they had 10 of the 14 were generally good teams. Now you got 16, so we've increased the pie of there's going to be more bad teams in the SEC. And the way this schedule shakes out in the future, however it will, we're going to have an SEC team that's got an 11-1 record or whatever, and they didn't play anybody in their league either. It's just how it's going to be in the era of expanded conferences.
That's my exact point. That if Nick Saban said this 2 years ago, he would be right. Nobody would want to hear it, but he would be right that there is no, as I always said, if you have enough ranked teams on your conference schedule, people made fun of Alabama playing Mercer even in the heyday of Nick Saban, but I defended it because they had 5 ranked teams in conference play.
Yes.
The reason why the 2017 thing is an absolute joke, George, UCF played 1 ranked team the whole year prior to the bowl game. Alabama played 5. They played 5. That's a big difference. Why should they stack an out-of-conference schedule when they're playing 5 in conference?
Exactly.
And to their credit, to Nick Saban's credit, what people are not bringing up either, his last 2 years, out of conference, he played Texas and Ohio State.
Yes.
Shouldn't have done it. Shouldn't have done it because he didn't win those national titles. He shouldn't have done it because that was before the 12-team playoff. He shouldn't have done it. He probably have an 8 rings if he didn't do that. So at that time, everything they were saying, I think their brain is still back there. Everything was saying is valid. But now you're losing to average teams. So this is the worst year for Bama because you lose to Vanderbilt, you lose to Oklahoma, and now the schedule's all funky. But my counter to what you're saying is I'm on the SEC out of conference schedule and their schedules not being what they were. I get all of that, but here's the only issue that I do have, and this is only going to be more of an issue when you get to 14 and 16 teams. And this is an argument that maybe you stay at 12, George. Because I even wanted to go to 8 first and then get to 12. But this is an argument for you to stay at 12. If what you're saying is true about the SEC and there's too many teams and you're going to sometimes have teams with easy schedules, etc. Okay, if that's true, fine. And Alabama screwed things up for themselves this year. But Indiana's out of conference schedule this year was FIU, Western Illinois, and Charlotte. Next year, it's very, very similar to that. And I know that it's not their fault they didn't play Penn State and they only played Ohio State, and Michigan was very, very down and they beat them, but they normally wouldn't in most years. I get all that. They benefited from the Big Ten schedule. Like you're saying that Alabama maybe at some point in the future would benefit from an easier SEC schedule just because the amount of teams and the way things work. But there got to be some... It's one thing to like the Ren Baker thing of you play 1 Power 4, you play FCS, then you play Group of 5. Indiana's out of conference schedule is not even doing that. They're not even doing that. So I do think there's got to be something that the system tells these teams.
Ohio State was obviously their toughest game this year. Next year they'll play Oregon on the road at Oregon, and they'll play Penn
look
State.
At the out of conference schedule.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah, but to your point, I mean, you've been talking about this for years, where like this is the way.
No. But I'm saying
if we are not going to incorporate strength of schedule as a definable metric, which it seems like the committee has not done, then why am I caring about making it any more difficult than I need to?
No.
And nobody will appreciate the fact that like league games, and this is, you call me Big Ten homer or whatever, nobody appreciate the fact that league games in the Big Ten are rock fights, like they're just going to be in most cases,
Right.
But you're still going to have at least one difficult opponent. Indiana got lucky with only having the one, and then Nebraska was their next best one, which is kind of
but
the best win really was Nebraska, which isn't good.
But to be clear, my point is not that Indiana should stack their out of conference schedule. I 100% West Virginia I think West Virginia should make it easier. And by the way, they're opening up with RMU next year instead of Penn State like it's been the last couple of years, and they're going to win that game. Whether it's you, me, Rich Rod, or Neil Brown could be
RMU, Ohio, and Pitt. Yeah,
I mean, even if they lose the brawl, which would be horrible, they would be 2-1. Like you're going to have a Group of 5 and FCS, and then Neil Brown, I can tell you he's a little bitter from it. So I get that. That's what it should be. But what I'm saying is, George, if you're going to bring up, which people are bringing up because they're talking against the SEC because they're annoyed with the SEC, and I do think the SEC argument this year is not valid overall. because they messed it up for themselves, namely Bama and even Ole Miss. But if you're going to bring up Alabama's out-of-conference schedule in the Mercer games, what I want to get out there is Indiana, SMU, and many of these other teams are playing even easier out-of-conference schedules, if not even the same out-of-conference schedule. So the reason why I'm bringing that up now, and this is what legitimately almost pissed me off in a way. You had Kirk Cignetti on game day with McAfee and the crew before their CFP game. Okay. He literally said that they don't care about rankings or whatever. They beat down top 25s on the regular. George, I'm going to be serious. He's literally a stupid person. He's a bold-faced liar, or he's a master manipulator. Which one of the three do you think he is?
It was
not what happened at all.
I know. It was bombastic heel move, and then he kind of backfired.
Here's my issue. I get being bombastic.
I do it on the show. Basically, he conflated a couple things. I think when
he talked about JMU's schedule when he was there.
he talked about team that he beat at JMU, which to his point, he's got like a third of the roster as JMU people. But I digress. I think his one claim, if you want to give him a claim, which I wouldn't, is that I think Nebraska was ranked 25 in the coaches when they played Nebraska. They were
the only one. But
again, that's it. You know, if we're that's a reach. We're reaching there. You know, they're in the 25, but there.
Yeah, he beat them down. He beat nobody else down. But here's my issue. I get doing the bombastic thing. He was sitting there next to Pat McAfee, Reese Davis, Nick Saban, who's an SEC guy, obviously, the whole crew. No one came back at him and said, you're factually wrong. Like, you're literally wrong.
They weren't ready. Yeah.
George, no, I'm being serious. I mean, I'm not trying to disrespect him if he's on the show, but George, we do this in you bring up politics, you bring up presidential debates. There are numerous times where in a respectful manner, a media member will say to a politician of any, whether it be Democrat or Republican, sir, what you're saying is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And no one in the public has any problem with it anymore. So why shouldn't that be? Why don't we fact check Kirk Cignetti? Like, that's just not true. Like, they literally had one ranked win off of what you're saying, Nebraska. They did not end the season ranked. They barely, again, had a quality year. He did beat them down. He didn't even play any other ranked wins, have any other ranked wins. The only other ranked team he played was Ohio State, who I only read the score of the Ohio State game. They lost by quite a bit. I mean, come on. Like, he didn't beat down anybody 38-15, losing to Ohio State. Like, they beat you down, if you want to talk about beating down. So you're going to sit there on a show and say the SEC shouldn't complain about their schedule. You're then going to say you beat down top 25 teams and can beat anybody in the country. You then are lying. And then hours later, you play a ranked team from another conference and you lose. Or independent in Notre Dame, obviously. But you know what I mean? Like,
and to this larger point, two things I want to real quick.
I wouldn't bring up their schedule if Kirk Cignetti doesn't say what he said.
Yeah. For the deserving best, the people picking the best again, like it's
got to be deserving. You got to prove it. You have to prove it.
It's utterly ridiculous. And if that were the case, then you just want, like you said, pick the teams at the beginning of the season, and the committee is this weird puppet master. Because if I said best, Mike, and we'll take just the games that have been played, the first round games, I'll stick Indiana and let them play SMU because that's my two lowest drawing teams in terms of interest, right? I'll create a sexy matchup where I have Texas play at Notre Dame, which sounds real sexy.
Yeah, and how's that fair to those schools, right?
Exactly. I'll send Ohio State, Ohio State's higher ranked. So Penn State was higher ranked. So I'll send Ohio State back to Penn State to play again for the second time this season.
Yeah, and how does that? And also you have Penn State higher ranked, and they lost to Ohio State head to head.
And then what's that leaving with Clemson and somebody else? So that's like, if I'm picking best, Tennessee, then why don't I just friggin' manipulate the matchups like a puppet master? So no, we don't want that.
If you want to do for TV ratings, your matchups will be better for TV, but they're not fair. Like, if that would mean, George, what that would be like is if you go to start the Major League Baseball playoffs back in the early 2000s in the American League, and instead of saying, okay,
Clemson, Tennessee, there you go, play that, So,
right, but it would be like in the early 2000s, the Yankees and Red Sox were playing every year in the ALCS and had those historic matchups. It would be like if the system said, well, you know what, instead of doing Yankees Cleveland in the division series, screw that. No, they're playing Boston right away because that's where the money is. And then we're just going to move Cleveland all the way to the ALCS, even though they didn't earn it. Like, what the hell? No, you got to let teams. earn
You got
what they
four,
get, and you
yeah,
got to play
and
the
listen,
games,
you
and
got
Bama
four
screwed themselves.
Northern E-based, Midwestern E-based teams, and you and I both know because we've watched these programs. Ohio State still wants to fire their coach, and they're in the second round of the playoff.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I
Ohio State's not going to be good forever, even though they've got a big NIL boost. Penn State, everybody loves watching James Franklin and Penn State fall on their face. So there's no sure guarantees here with that. And the final thing I got to say to these SEC people is, I could, even if I'm leaving SMU out, I'm putting Miami in. Like that's the other thing. Is Alabama's not
but you could argue. I think the TV would rather have Miami in.
Yeah, but Alabama's not the first team out of this bracket. Miami is the first team out of this bracket. Like that's our other problem. Is not only is that there's no conceivable, viable, reasonable path for Alabama in any shape, form, or fashion to have been in this bracket. Miami loses to an 8-win Syracuse team in their final game of the season, one of the best Syracuse teams in the last decade, and that knocks them out. And Alabama's losses again are to who they lost to, which we've already talked about, Vanderbilt and Oklahoma.
Well, here's how crazy this is. You know what would have put Alabama in, especially in your scenario where you're not respecting SMU, because you could make an argument SMU deserved it even less than Indiana did. But here's how. And I think by losing both games, they certainly shouldn't be in. But if Alabama would have lost to Vanderbilt or Oklahoma and beat the other, like only had one of those two losses, they would have probably got in.
Yes.
Just one of the two losses.
Correct.
Having both of those two losses to two average teams, one historically average and one that is rarely average, but having a real bad year, that kind of ruined it. And again, Ole Miss, they had the big win, but then they blew it against Kentucky. You have to play the games or else there's no point of the season. I get that. But I also want to make this clear too. You got to figure out a way, because we have been talking about, as much as I agree, George, we've been talking about for a decade now on if the committee is not going to respect strength of schedule, then you shouldn't schedule anything out of conference, whether it be the SEC, Big 10, Big 12, whoever. If it's me doing this, you should absolutely take into account strength of schedule. I don't understand why we're not taking into account strength of schedule even more. It is not fair to certain programs that we are not taking into account strength of schedule. And if we end up with all Big 10 and SEC programs, I would actually be fine with that if we're going to take into account strength of schedule. Now, this year, that wouldn't have come into play because they did have average losses. But in a given year, if they have a harder schedule like it was 5 years ago, then maybe they deserve to be there. Strength of schedule should be part of it. Like if you have, like even this year, everyone was celebrating Pitt, for example, when they went 7-0 and now they've lost 6 straight. George, I'm being serious here. All 7 of those wins, do you know they literally didn't play one ranked team the whole way through? How is that the same as if at that point Alabama had one loss to Vanderbilt? At that time, Vanderbilt was undefeated or had like one loss. Now, Alabama at that point, when you release the ranking in week 8, they could argue, oh, yeah, we're better than Pitt, who hasn't beaten any ranked teams. We beat some, and then we had this one blemish. Like, I could hear a blemish argument. You don't got to undefeat every year if you have quality wins and you have a tougher schedule. But usually, I think part of why I don't like the CFP releasing rankings earlier in the season, Pitt was an average team this year. Even everyone would agree. They got exposed. They had some injuries, but they went 7-0, and then they lost 6 straight. And once they started playing better team, they started losing. They even lose their bowl game to a group of 5, to a MAC school. But at the end of the day, they get to say they were in the CFP twice this year. They were ranked inside the CFP twice. They wouldn't have been if you released the rankings later.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you don't
People
see
are
enough.
taking it as gospel.
Early.
Yeah.
You're taking it as gospel too quick, and then programs are going to brag about it. 7-6 is not that. At the end of the day, George, the only difference of them in West Virginia this year is they won the brawl. Their seasons were very similar, and then they're not firing their coach. West Virginia did fire their coach. There are Pitt fans that want Narduzzi fired now. So, but they got in the CFP twice. But at the end of the day, the seasons aren't that much different besides the head-to-head. And you wouldn't have the issue of them being in the CFP twice if it wasn't for the CFP coming out way too damn early. There's no benefit outside of TV. And I get TV, I get conversation, I get social media as part of this, but it causes more of a mess to this. It does have people need to take it with a grain of salt where they freak out. You have people in week 6 freaking out like, oh my God, how can this team be in and not this team? How can he be ranked here, not there? And it's just like, let it play out. Who cares? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, because things are going to start playing out once these teams start playing teams. You get different schedules, things like that. But I have no problem. I don't have a problem necessarily with the conference champs getting in. I do think what they should do is I do think there should be a reseeding. If you want to do an automatic thing, if you win your conference title, like you do if you win the AFC North or NFC North or whatever, even if they're easier divisions, you can automatically get in for that. But I'd like to do a reseeding.
Yeah, and the reseeding's easy because there's so much, when we think about it in like the NBA and these other leagues, like sometimes, it's 2-3 days later and you got to go play. No, it's like what? 10 days here
between now the first round to this other, and
no,
then when you
I didn't even think about that, but no, I would support something like I would support a reseeding,
because not only a reseeding, George. Think of it this way: this isn't even about Alabama at all. Yes, Arizona. Here's how the schedules are unfair, and here's how the conferences are unfair. Arizona State and Boise State are programs that were able to take off and wait for their opponent to come to them. They got basically a bye.
Yeah.
Is Penn State not on par or better than those teams? I mean, Penn State had a year where they had one loss. Their only loss was to Ohio State, who was a top 5 team. They did have a ranked win over Illinois, even though they parted it. It's not as great at the end of the year. They did have some quality wins otherwise, even though this is not, exactly what their fans would like. They had an equal or better body of work. Yes, Boise State kept it close with Oregon. They lost. They didn't win. And then who's their big win? They don't really have one. They ran through an easier schedule.
They did.
Arizona. Who's the big win?
I'm all right with Boise. Boise doesn't bother me as much.
Yeah, but you can't give me a big win. You're saying close.
No, I can't give you a big win. But this is what happens when the ACC decided to eat itself alive, because arguably the ACC.
I'm saying that you
could have had their champion in that slot, and then if the Big 12 has a 1-loss or 2-loss champion, instead, the Big 12 champion's got 3 losses.
I'm not against them being in, to clarify.
Yeah,
I'm saying that
you don't like them on the bye.
I think giving them a 3 seed when you cannot give me a quality win is a little ludicrous. You got to give me a quality win, or they shouldn't be there.
So this is why I don't
That's what I'm saying, and I don't want Oregon to be the quality win because they lost the game. So my point is, I don't have any problem with these teams. The conference champs should all get in, but I do not like the automatic spot. That is different. That is a different scenario than what it's one thing to. I am for deserving over best, but that is not deserving either. Here's the difference: if Penn State played in the Big 12, in the ACC, in the Mountain West, do you not think they'd win the conference?
Yeah.
So then if they were in those conferences and they would have the bye, you're penalizing Penn. This is my issue. You're penalizing Penn State for being in a tougher conference at the end of the day. You are.
We're trying to get to.
Are you not?
It's not. No, because we're trying to still give the fact that winning your conference matters.
Yeah,
now,
but they're not
you could have an argument.
They're not created equal.
I get that. So to your point, stick Clemson in there. But this is the lot we were drawn this year. It was.
Well, I would rather Clemson than Boise State. But Clemson at least has a quality win. Boise State does not have one.
Arguably the most loopy year since 2007. Not as loopy as 2007, but since 2007, this was a loopy year where there was a lot of upheaval in those top rankings. Anyway. Oregon has been the stalwart and model of consistency. Ohio State slightly behind that, and then everything else behind. You could argue it's not fair to Ohio State.
Well, they lost to Michigan. That's different. They lost
I know, but
Penn State didn't lose. Besides the Ohio State head-to-head, they lost. Their only loss this year is to a top 5 team.
Yeah,
Ohio State lost to an average Michigan team who's not good. That is Penn State has a legit gripe here. Now they beat SMU, so it's not an issue. They got a head-to-head with Boise State. They can take care of business there. If they lose, it's their own fault. But what I'm saying is that they were put in danger, even though they won, by having to play an extra game to be a champion than Boise State, when they admittedly, you would agree, went through a harder schedule.
Yes. Yeah.
So how's that fair?
That's because we're picking 4 conference champions, and they said one of those conference champions can be. You want to fix it? It's that we let the G5 team in, but they don't get one of those 4 seats.
But I've been arguing that for 5 years.
100%. Okay, we can support that.
100%. That's what I would do, because here's the reason why I would do that.
Yeah.
People would say, what would you do in an aberration season where they have a harder schedule? Name me a year that's been the case. Never. The group of 5 best team, whether they be UCF, Liberty, Boise State this year, even going back to 2004 with Boise State, that was a great story. Their schedule was easier than
I
Oklahoma's
think
to
it's
get in
got
that season.
and I get that they only lost to Oregon, and I know but
It's not
I
a
think
win; it's a loss.
yeah, I think for you it's got to be kind of like Cincinnati when they got in the 4. It's got to be undefeated.
But they also beat Notre Dame.
That's yeah.
I'm not saying undefeated because I think
One
UCF
quality
schedule was
win
weak.
and undefeated, and that's kind of the minimum threshold for a G5 for you to be considered for one of those buys. You would say
You'd have to have a quality win.
one
And strength of
a
schedule
quality
should
win and under yeah. So okay.
I'm
So
not
if
requiring
Boise if Boise had the quality win on their schedule and still one loss, you're all right with that.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not
Okay.
requiring undefeated.
So yeah, it is very significantly the fact that they just had which is correct. They've not played
But my because again, this goes back to my
Congrats that you played Oregon, but yeah.
here again.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to penalize them for playing Oregon like you were saying about the undefeated thing. What I'm saying, me personally, Mike Asti, is I would take strength of schedule into consideration. George, to be fair to me, my point has been the same for years.
Yes.
The reason why I do not legitimize UCF's 2017 claim is not because they went undefeated, which is great. Kudos to them. They did beat Auburn, which is a big time win for that program. Wonderful. Their strength of schedule, and someone can fact check me here, but I believe this is accurate. Their strength of schedule was 96. 96.
Mm-hmm.
I'm letting that simmer. There's no one we're talking about to this point is anything close to that, including the bad teams that we're covering.
Yeah.
So that is ludicrous. You cannot be a national champion with a strength of schedule at 96. That is absolutely asinine.
Mm-hmm.
My point of it is, if you want to play a tough strength of schedule, like Boise State put Oregon on there, they knew Oregon would have been good 10 years ago when they put the schedule on. They put a tough schedule together in the out of conference to open of the year. That is great. Kudos to them. Not saying you have to do it, but if you do it, that is a bump for you in strength of schedule. What I'm saying is, for you as a group of 5 to get a bye over Power 4 programs that are playing multiple ranked teams in and out of conference play. To Penn State's credit this year, they did play West Virginia. That was a 9-win team the year before. They have the only loss to Ohio State. They did have a win over ranked Illinois. Like Penn State this year is a perfect example of they had a better body of work than Boise State. I don't think it's ludicrous to say I'm not requiring undefeated. I'm looking at your overall strength of schedule. The Oregon, if you want to do Ken Palm, for example, I'm not deducting them for losing to Oregon. I will not. It's a close game, impressive. But they didn't beat anybody. They didn't beat anybody. You didn't beat anyone. Why should you automatically jump Power 4 programs who are playing multiple rank? And the answer that you're giving me of, well, Penn State should have won the conference. It's much harder to win the Big Ten than it is to win the Mountain West.
Yeah.
That is not a fair system. That is what I'm saying.
And I think it's okay.
You can let Boise in. You just then you can seed it off of strength of schedule, do a BCS ranking off of strength of schedule after you let everybody in and after you do your CFP ranking. I think that would be a fair way to do it, because there's going to be a year that Penn State will lose in that first round game, and then James Franklin's going to flip out for 2 hours in a presser. They won, but their schedule was hard.
I think in the minds of people too, I think Genty helps that a lot. I think having Ashton Genty, a Heisman finalist, and the type of season he had, because if we're just talking, it's Boise State and they're 11-1, they lost to Oregon, and we don't know much about them, but people were actually watching them because of Genty, myself included, and so
he had a great year, but it's still easier competition. It's still
he had an excellent year, but I think
it was an historic year, 100%.
Historic year. I think it draws. I think it. But if we're talking about a team that doesn't really have anybody notable on it, then maybe they slip under the radar. And
Abdul Carter and Drew Aller are notable players. I don't think.
No. I'm not talking about it compared to Penn State. I'm saying that if Boise State was a more visible group of 5 best team this year because of Ashton Genty, if I give you Boise State with 2 losses, then who am I putting up there? Memphis? Who's even the next group of 5 team? I don't know. But I
think it might have been Tulane if they didn't lose.
I'm sorry, Tulane. Yeah. They were, and so nobody would have been like Tulane's one of the 4. But
Memphis had 2 losses. But
But so to that point is it was a lot of things, a lot of factors went in Boise State's favor this year.
I agree with what you're saying, but my last point on this is, earlier you want to do deserving and not worry about TV, and now you're bumping them because of Gentry. What I'm saying is,
I'm saying that I believe people ranked them so high So again, we're very specifically.
That's why they were ranked high, is because they were watching them every week because of Gentry, and they had an historic season.
Yes.
My point is that's unfair.
That's
literally my overlying point.
Yeah, I'm generally would agree with you.
When we're doing the CFP, here's exactly why it's unfair. Gentry had an historic season. Forget who he's playing in. An historic season should be remembered forever. He was a Heisman candidate. He didn't win, but you could argue maybe he should have. But George
finished second in the closest Heisman vote in at least 15 years.
Yeah, and I could argue that Travis Hunter did deserve it because you're doing it at two. I mean, he was literally top 5 at 2 positions. That's hard to deny him. And they weren't a better team, but that award is individual.
Yeah, it's an individual award. Yeah, we're not disputing that.
That's an individual award. Right. So my point is, I can respect what you're saying with the individual accolade and the individual award and the trip to New York. I don't need to put them in as a 3 seed in a CFP because what an individual is doing. When I'm ranking what I should be doing, I'm not saying they are, but what I should be doing if I'm ranking CFP teams is who are the most deserving, including strength of schedule, as a team, not as an individual, as a team. The Penn State, George, we're going to find, I'll tell you right now, and here's the funny thing. This sport is driven by Vegas, right? Right?
Yes.
The night of the CFP, Penn State beats SMU, Boise State is off. Within minutes, every major sports book said Penn State is a 10.5-point favorite over the team that got a better seed than them. The sports books are screaming, you did it wrong. And if Penn State, this is what I'm just saying, there's a lot, people are talking about all this pressure on Penn State. There is pressure on them because if you lose to a group of 5, that would look bad despite the playoff win. Boise State has a lot of pressure too. If they get out there and Penn State mops the floor with them, that is going to exactly add fuel to what I'm saying. And the next Gentry and Boise State is going to get screwed.
Genty. That would do 2 things where, A, it would add fuel to that, and B, it would quiet all the James Franklin naysayers because, listen, they boat raced SMU. SMU looked like a team that didn't belong in the playoff. So I still need
it's a playoff win, though.
I know, but a very mediocre one. So but
they can't do anything about their path because if they beat Boise State, are you going to say that's a big win? Or are you going to say that's No, but they're a group of 5 team
on a neutral field, not in Happy Valley. I get that it's group of 5, but I'm more of a believer if they beat Boise. Boise's a better team than SMU this year. I'll give you that.
I understand, but I'm telling you, history is going to say that's a group of 5. They have to go.
Fair enough. But I'll take Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl against Boise State. If they win that game, I will give James Franklin more credit for them beating SMU, whose quarterback looked like he didn't know how to throw the football. And somehow they were in the ACC championship.
Yeah, but the weirdest thing is, didn't Jennings only have like 4 picks going into that game? So that's not. But he looked horrible, but he didn't do that all year.
And Penn State, good defense. I'm not diminishing it, but
But I'm just saying that it would. Genty's season and Boise State's season and being close with Oregon should not be enough to put them as a higher seed just because they are a better TV draw than normal for group of 5s. I'm saying that the overall body of work on your strength of schedule should matter. And if Boise State, I will say this, and you can call me a hater if you want. If Boise State was in the Big Ten, they would have had 3 losses and Genty wouldn't have broke a record. Period.
Yeah.
Period.
So
then their schedule is benefiting them.
I give you that it's a micro ranking within the overall ranking. So Boise State has to compete against 5 teams: Oregon, champions of the Big Ten; Texas, champions of Georgia, champions of the SEC.
Yeah, Texas did win. Yeah.
Clemson, who was the champion of the ACC; Arizona State, who was the champion of the Big 12.
And you could argue toward Arizona State's the weakest of any of these teams.
So 2 of these are in a class by themselves. Oregon and Georgia over here in a class by themselves. So now I got 3 teams for 2 spots, and the 3 teams are Clemson, Arizona State, and Boise State. I could argue for putting Clemson in as one of the top 4 seeds, though that's not how the ranking shook down. And I would probably stick Boise State in over Arizona State because the Big 12 was mud all season and had
Arizona State's the worst of those 3 teams, 100%.
Yeah. So I'm giving Boise.
No, that's not what. But I'm arguing Penn State and the other. I'm arguing Tennessee, Penn State are better than Boise State.
Yes, but your quarrel is less with Boise. It's specifically this year with Boise State. But in general, as you have preached in seasons past, it is with the idea of giving that group of 5 team an access at the bye when there are teams like
I
Penn
said that.
State.
Yeah, I do not think that the Group of 5 team, even in what I'm saying is, even in a scenario like this year,
Mhm.
where the conference champion from a Group of 5 is better than weaker conference champions like a Clemson, like an Arizona State, etc. I don't have a problem if the ACC and Big 12 champion gets in,
Yeah.
but I don't think that that automatically. To make this clear, I am a strength of schedule guy. If you are an ACC team and your strength of schedule suggests that you should be a 12 seed, fine. If you're a Big 12 team and you win your conference and you should be an 11 or a 12 seed, fine. I'm
Okay.
not for anybody automatically getting anything. But if you're a Group of 5 team,
That is the Mike Asti way.
George, Arizona State, I do believe that Boise State's better than Arizona State.
Yeah.
If you want to be fair to Arizona State, they played a harder schedule than Boise State.
That's true. Yeah.
Arizona, now the Big 12's mud, but Arizona State played 3 ranked teams.
Correct.
So that's my point, that by being in that's why there is the Power 4.
Yes.
Yes, SEC and Big 10 are better than the ACC and Big 12. Yes, you're going to have weird years where the Big 12 is maybe not as good as they should be. You lost your 2 power programs. If the ACC loses to Clemson and Florida State or Miami, they're going to be mud too. I get all of that. And I get it's different in football and basketball. I get the money as part of this too, keeping them in the Power 4. But even with the Big 12 being mud, West Virginia, Colorado, these are, West Virginia was an average team. Colorado was actually a good team. BYU was a good team. You're looking at Arizona State as the conference champs. I'm talking about all different levels of the spectrum here. They played tough. They played a tougher schedule than Boise State did. I think people were in this mirage because Boise State played it close with Oregon, that there were voters that were basically giving them that almost as a point for a win. They did not win, and that is bullshit. That is what I'm saying. There is no Power 4 team in America that if they lose a close game to a top team, they would be given that mulligan. They're doing it for Boise. They're giving them the benefit of the doubt because they're Boise State. But my point is, George, if you're going to play with the big boys, then it all got to be even. Strength of schedule should matter. If you have a tougher strength of schedule in a rare year like Cincinnati that you mentioned where they beat Notre Dame, they would have deserved a better spot than, say, an ACC champ or a Big 12 champ with a weaker schedule in a given year. But not this year. Some of those teams had harder schedules. I have no problem with Boise State getting in. I have a problem with them being the number 3 seed. And that is the crux of the issue because, George, if you really want to be fair and you really want the hot take as we close up shop on this, the way you fix this all together, which they will never do, this will never happen even as you expand things, but this is what should have happened for the past 20 years. This would have fixed the UCF thing. This would have fixed Cincinnati even. This would have fixed Liberty being undefeated, not even barely being ranked. This would have fixed this year with Boise State, even though they play close with Oregon. There should be a national champ for the Power, and there should be a national champ for the Group of 5. There should be 2 different titles. They're playing for the same title with an easier schedule. That is my problem. If you
you put them in the to your point, then they don't get the top 4 billing, but they were still ranked.
No, in this particular year, they would deserve the top 12. I'm just saying in most years that it would make more sense to go for Group of 5 title. In this given year, they would have deserved at least a top 12 spot. I do concede that.
Yeah.
I just don't think they would have been a top 4. But George, that is the real problem here. You have these schedules. These schedules are not even close. Or Boise State's schedule was not. They are a better team, I believe, on paper than Arizona State, but they did not play a tougher schedule. I do care about who you played. Personally, not everyone does, but I know they have a quality loss, but who did they beat? That's why I bring up Penn State. I agree that Arizona State and Clemson are weak conference champs, but Penn State was a non-conference champ from a brutal top 2 conference that had a ranked win, a top 5 loss as their only loss, and they played a Power 4 in West Virginia to week 1 when most other programs were not doing that, and they still ended up with a worse seed than a Group of 5. That, I think, is unfair if you really want to look at it. I do think that is unfair to them. Now, they won, and they got head-to-head, so they're going to be able to play it on the field. But I really don't know how anyone can argue that Penn State did not have a tougher road to get to the same exact spot than Boise State. That's my problem. You should not make a team do more to get to the same level. But people are sick of the Big Ten and the SEC, so they have no problem doing that. I'm trying to keep it fair here. I'm an equal opportunity employer when it comes to CFP. I think strength of schedule got to come into play here. It's not been coming into play, so obviously you shouldn't care about scheduling that way, but I think it should come into play. That's all I'm saying. But if you're going to sit up there and just make, I mean, Kirk today just lied. I mean, that's just some bullshit. Like that. That's
see how it
bullshit.
plays out on
That's
the
not even a
field.
heel thing. He's just making stuff up.
We will see how it plays out on the field when Penn State does indeed play Boise State.
We will see.
As the Nittany Lions now have the quote unquote easiest path to potential.
They did luck out with an easy path regardless
in the college football playoff.
Yeah.
Championship. So we'll see how it goes. The other sports organization dealing with I don't want to call it controversy, but we'll call it issues, is the NBA, which been riding a little high there for a couple of seasons coming out of the pandemic and the bubble and all that was a success. And we're year 2 of this in-season tournament, the Emirates NBA Cup, and a complete, disaster this year where, you get Milwaukee and Oklahoma City in the final. And if you're a basketball head like myself and you follow this stuff, you got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and playing against Giannis Antetokounmpo. And so there's, interesting matchups there, but, people writ large aren't interested in it. As tickets to go to the event were easily available on a secondary market, and nobody's really cared. And the NBA has a ratings problem this season. Now they're trumpeting the most recent efforts on Christmas Day, which featured good games and good matchups, and sometimes they pit teams they hope are going to shake out, and it doesn't always work. But the noon win, the NBA saying that viewership up 80% on Christmas from last year's Christmas games to this year's Christmas games. They average across the games about 5 million plus people per game. The most people that have watched Christmas Day NBA basketball in the last 5 years. You had Victor Wembanyama going to Madison Square Garden against the Knicks in that traditional noon slot, and that was a close game all the way down to the end.
Yep.
Minnesota and I think Dallas played in the second game. I didn't catch much of that. We had a great game, which I was looking forward to even before the day started, which was the Lakers and Golden State. And even though the Lakers led that game by 10 points, multiple points late in the fourth, the Golden State came back and Steph Curry had a 3 to tie it. Austin Reeves hit a running floating 2-point shot and ended up winning the game. So that was entertaining in Chase Center in San Francisco for the Lakers to win, and then the nightcap had Denver playing Nikola Jokic playing in the nightcap. So it was ratings all up across the board for that. You could argue they started at a very low place, and that's why you say 80% sounds like a lot, and it is, but it's because your number was low to begin with, and it's been low for most of this season, and the league is trying, as it's moving into this, new media shakeup partnership as games move from TNT, from Turner to NBC next season, and the parameters of, who's going to do some of those things and whatnot still to be figured out over there. ESPN's still going to have its contract. We have Inside the NBA being leased to from Turner to ESPN to air on select dates on ESPN's air. So there's a lot of movement in terms of the media side of it. But I think overall, Mike, the general issue here is consistency and markability of what you're going to see on a nightly basis. Like when I go to a Penguins game, I know that Sidney Crosby is going to play every night, barring injury type of thing. If I go to a football game, I generally know for most of the season, save late in the season when teams are out of playoffs or, again, injuries or whatnot, I know the people I'm coming there to see and I'm paying for. On any given, I can buy a ticket for an NBA game in 2 weeks, and I don't know who's going to actually be playing that night based on weird load management requirements or suggestions or whatever it may be, or Joel Embiid fell down in the warm-up and when they were afraid he wasn't going to play, and then he did end up playing. So it's just, there's against the Celtics, Philadelphia and Boston was one of those other matchups. So there's just this inconsistency about when you have a ticket, or if you're a fan going to a game, what you're going to see. And then of course that translates to television, because if people aren't going to go in person, then why am I going to do the same on television if these people are out and not playing? And
you turn the game off.
It's just the league's at kind of this impasse where we thought the transition was going okay from LeBron and Steph are these guys, and they're going out the door whenever that is. They are walking out the door. And the next generation is Giannis and Luka and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jason Tatum and whoever, Embiid, whoever else you want to throw in that, Paolo Banchero. It's people that haven't yet transcended into this national conversation, national consciousness, the way LeBron and Steph have, who are all world, all-star, gold medal players throughout their career. Kevin Durant, will put him in that later group too, as he's statistically near the end of, and later on the later side of his career than he is on the earlier side of it. And as this league evolves into this new generation, it's having a hard time making these new stars marketable if you're somebody that doesn't follow basketball. And that's add that into guys not consistently playing on X, Y, or Z night just out of rest concerns. And here we are. So is there an easy, I don't think there's an easy answer to it, Mike. You've talked about less games. I'd be for less games just because I think 82 is too much. Maybe something like 65, 66, but this is where we're at in the NBA, and it risks, being where at one point it was the definitive de facto second most popular sport in the country. It risks kind of getting mired in with this baseball hockey group as more of a regional sport and less of a national one.
Yeah, and you could definitely argue that right now the NFL is top dog and college football is number 2 and NBA is number 3. If you're going to include college football as being a pro league, because it basically is now in all intents and purposes, then you could argue the NBA is in that third tier. And part of what the NBA had going for it to argue to be on the level of the NFL, not that it really was ever there, but to certainly argue that it was a step below the NFL and above everyone else, the NBA is a soap opera. It almost is more intriguing on the off the court, off-season drama than even sometimes the on the court. On the court, obviously, has been very entertaining. You can have great games and great matchups that you just brought up there, and you did have them this year on Christmas Day. But George, you had a future Hall of Famer. I made a joke on calling Cincinnati a liar. I do believe he lied or exaggerated. James Harden, a future Hall of Famer, literally, when he knew he was being recorded, called a general manager a liar. And then he didn't say it jokingly. He said, if you didn't hear me, I'm going to repeat myself. Daryl Morey's a liar. That is a very intriguing storyline that I would imagine, George, you were tuned in to watching all the shows thinking, man, this is a Hall of Fame player calling this guy a liar. Like, I got to, did I hear this right? And then you're seeing it on social media. And that became a buzz story going into a season. Kawhi Leonard, LeBron, really from the decision on to now, it's been like that. And that's created the NBA being such a conversation piece, the Ben Simmons drama as well. And it leads into the season. And there are people that tune into those games for those storylines where you wanted to tune in. When is Ben Simmons ever going to play again? Oh, his first game against the Sixers. I want to tune in and watch, even if I'm not a basketball fan, for example, when he wasn't an impact player and he hasn't been since then. So the NBA has all of that going for it, but now so does college football. With the portal and NIL, so does college football now. So the NBA cannot just rely on that off the court soap opera drama to add intrigue and be that number 2 of the NFL like it was for a decade. College football certainly has overtaken it now. And I do believe that it's still well ahead of Major League Baseball. I do believe it's still well ahead of the NHL. I don't believe it's going to fall into that situation because there's so much more national media coverage. ESPN cares about it more. There's so much more national media coverage in those sports. It's going to give it a step above those. But it's impossible to require having a LeBron or a Steph Curry or players that not only are legends, but also transcend into pop culture in order to be there. Because, George, after Jordan retired, people thought, oh, when are we ever going to get a Jordan again? And then Kobe came along. And then when are we ever going to get a Kobe again? And then LeBron comes along. And there are people that don't want to rank Tim Duncan where he should be in terms of all-time players because he was so boring and wasn't a marketable asset. People think the same about Kawhi Leonard right now, who also kept getting hurt, and how that's a down for the league. But there have been marketable stars, and the NBA has also marketed those individual stars way better than the NHL has, way better than even Major League Baseball has. Mike Trout's a generational player when healthy, and Major League Baseball dropped the ball in marketing him. So that doesn't happen in the NBA. They market their individual stars, even if they're not ever going to be the cachet of LeBron and Steph again. They eventually find those guys. They always have the drama and the intrigue for the casual fan. I don't think any of that's the problem. I think an issue that exists that they can't fix is The NFL decided to go head to head, and they clearly are behind them, and everyone will always be. And no matter what happens in the NFL, whether there's a scandal, whether there's on the field, off the field drama, whether you're dealing with players being accused of rape and murder and Antonio Brown's off the field issues, people kept watching. People kept watching. I live in Pittsburgh. People said when they signed Michael Vick, they're never going to watch a Steeler game. The ratings went up. I mean, they kept watching, even with the dog fighting situation that went on with him. Nothing will ever stop the NFL from being that behemoth, bulletproof enterprise as the number one organization, sports league, whatever, gambling, fan interest, jersey sales, TV ratings, even streaming services. They can flourish on Netflix because they get the streaming numbers that are higher than any show that ever could be there. The top billing for any show that could be there. So but you can't compete with that. Even when you're drawing and you're getting 5 million or so on an average on this Christmas Day game, the NFL is giving you 24.5 was around the number I saw. Like the NFL on 2 games just destroyed what the NBA had. So the NBA had that as their day. They always had that as their day. That was the one day the NFL didn't touch in the past. But now that they're touching it, even if they're going to do it on Netflix and do streaming, they're going to crush the NBA. They would crush the NHL and NBA and MLB even more. And I'm not against having the games reduced. I'm not against going from 82 to maybe 75, 74. But George, to counter that, they did not reducing games, but they put a rule in place recently where you have to play a certain amount of games to vie for individual awards, to be able to be an MVP, things that the individual players really care about, that Joel Embiid said he really wanted years ago, and then he eventually got. They put a rule in place that you got to hit a certain number. Maybe that can fight load management. The idea of that was to fight load management. But the problem is, George, even when they put that in, that's not help load management. Players are like, okay, I won't win the individual award. We're going to go ahead and win a championship. The NBA is so driven by looking to win a championship that is all that it's about. And even if you lose the games, even if you whittle and have less games, if you're going to have the NFL on Christmas Day, if you're going to have to have some games before Christmas. I don't agree with Charles Barkley. I've just started on Christmas Day. You'd be playing until July. Like, no, you can't be doing that, or you'd be having 40 games. Even if you have 65, you got to play some before Christmas. The NFL is going to beat you there. So I don't know what really can be done, certainly as you're ushering LeBron and Steph Curry out, because you have great stars that you mentioned, but they're not necessarily those guys. You may not see those guys for a while, like you didn't think you'd see Jordan again for a while until LeBron really. But I think it's still ahead of the others. I think there's a little bit of an exaggeration of the NBA being totally down. And George, what I will also add to this, and I don't think there's a fix here either for where national media is going and Stephen A. Smiths of the world and how that's so covered. The NBA is so covered more so than the other pro leagues besides the NFL. I think part of why you got to a point now with load management and why individual stars and teams are basically punting regular season sometimes to just care about the playoffs. In Major League Baseball, you can have a generational star player be ranked as one of the best ever. Everyone universally accepts it. Team not be great. We grew up with it. Barry Bonds, Ken Griffey Jr., and that's just the case. And no one's going to really spend hours on it and ragging them. They know they're great. The team's not great. That's just the end of it. They're going to the Hall of Fame, and that'll be great. And everyone's going to still rank them where they are. And yeah, there are Yankees who are going to collect rings back then, and Red Sox maybe more recently, and Dodgers more recently now in this era. But it doesn't mean that, Bellinger is better than Griffey was. It's just nobody would ever say that. In the NBA culture that has partly been driven by the Stephen A. Smiths of the world, and I respect his career, but that's the case. The First Take Show, the Skip Baylesses. George, the culture that we grew up with, certainly the last 15 years in the NBA, if you don't win a title, if your team isn't good, you're trash. We're going to make fun of you ad nauseum. People are going to argue that you shouldn't be ranked where you should be. There's people that made a living saying LeBron shouldn't be top 10 all time when everything else in the world says he certainly should be there. And he does have rings now. That culture does not exist in Major League Baseball. That does not exist in the NHL. Yeah, people were on Ovechkin before winning a cup. But George, once he won a cup, that's it. He's one of the best. He has a cup. It's not the 3 Crosby has, but he doesn't need to win more. People realize the team wasn't as good. He didn't have as many players around him. He's being celebrated. That's the end of it. George, if this was the NBA and LeBron had 1 ring and was setting all these records going for Kareem at that time, there would be a Skip Bayless out there would be like, yeah, but one ring, like individual record with one ring, it doesn't even count for me. Like that comment would be said. No one's saying that about Ovechkin now. Like the culture of the NBA is so different that it almost lends itself to load management. I mean, I almost would say that if I was the player today, I almost would be like, okay, national media, if you're gonna rate me off of winning championships and that's it, then yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and leave my worst team and join a stacked charity ring service like Kevin Durant did, because they're gonna give me the rings and shut you up, even though that didn't work. I'm gonna go ahead and load management myself. Like, why should I play all these games if you only care about the postseason? If we don't care about the regular season, why the hell am I playing in the regular season games, and we're just going to worry about the postseason because that's what I'm being graded by? That culture has lent itself to this. And yeah, it does make it harder to want to go to games for ticket sales or for ratings, especially when you're going up against the NFL now, who's on Christmas Day. I don't know what the fix is, but I think the culture around the league and around media and around fans and around social media to the NBA that is different than, say, the NHL, Major League Baseball, other sports. It's created this monster. I don't see how you fix load management now. There are teams that don't want these guys to play. It's not just the players dogging it. There are teams that literally say, we're going to play Joel Embiid once a week. Like that, we don't care. We want to go to the postseason. Granted, their season's going nowhere. But it's not just him trying to dog it. The Sixers are on the same boat in terms of load management with them.
And kind of the other weird thing the NBA is kind of fumbling is it has the benefit of being the only of our professional sports that we play, save for soccer, where no head covering, no face mask, no helmet.
It helps the marketing, yes.
And it's always like, oh, you can't see these players, which is why NFL players are now doing podcasts and they're doing everything else under the sun, and commercials and everything like that to get to be better visible and marketable. NBA players, it's them out there. There's nothing restricting what you're seeing on the court. I argue that NBA, the in-game experience, like being in the lower level specifically, is fun. It's fun to go to NBA games, but you've got issues when you can't you're marketing these players. So Anthony Edwards in a Sprite commercial.
I don't know what they can do more to market the players.
And I just don't know if they're going to be the people playing every time.
Yeah, but how, again, if you already did the thing about individual awards where you're making them play a certain amount of games and the players say, we don't care. What can you? I don't think there's anything you can do. What can you do? You cannot change the Stephen A. Smith culture. You cannot change the mentality of the playoffs mattering more than the regular season. They hear all of this. They're the same age. They're on social media. Like, you know what I mean? How can you put that genie back in the bottle and tell the players, we get that Stephen A. Smith and those people are going to say the playoffs is all that matters, but we need you to play in the regular season in game 15 because we need it for our ratings and for our money and for our ticket sales. You know what they're going to say to you? I don't care. I want it for my legacy. I'm not worried about your bottom line. Like, how are you going to motivate the players to care about the bottom line, not of the franchise, who also agrees they should load management in many cases, but for Adam Silver and the league? They're not going to care. Why should they? That is not they're not being talked about every day on ESPN. Adam Silver is not being debated every day. Joel Embiid is. Giannis is. Damian Lillard is. Damian Lillard is numerous times was said he can't be a top 5, best shooter ever until he gets and goes to the finals. Like, that's not fair. He's a great shooter regardless. That's why he joined this good team now. But that conversation drives this, and I do not see how you ever put the genie back in the bottle and ever fix it. Yes, you could reduce games. That might be the only answer. But even if you do that, I think if you move it to 65 games, players would load management and only play 45. I don't think they care to play all the games like in the other sports or like players of the past in this culture, in this NBA culture in particular. And I don't know how do you fix it.
Yeah, a combination of, like, I like the idea of the in-season tournament, but it kind of fizzled out in year 2 as the good teams didn't play well.
Yeah, I wasn't intrigued as much this year.
So it was, and if you follow basketball, Rockets have been an upstart team, so they had a significant role in the tournament. Oklahoma City was a good team last year, one of the top teams in the West. Yeah. But again, it's very
they weren't healthy, but yes,
and there's some nicheness in there. Decrease the games, and you got to kind of get to, we established Thursday night. Some of this in terms of the windows, Tuesday, if you watch basketball, Tuesday is in terms of national broadcasts, I'm speaking of. Tuesday was an NBA TV day. Wednesday is usually ESPN. Thursday is currently TNT, Turner. Friday, ESPN.
ESPN, yeah.
Sunday, once in a while, once the spring comes occasionally. So, and I think once the TNT deal ends, and I forget what I read now, but I think NBC wants to take either maybe Monday or Tuesday, or I can't remember what days, but there's going to be specific days again. Lock in those, like, those are, because we know when our football viewing days are, right? We know when Sunday Night Baseball.
But how does that help you if you go Christmas Day and Knicks are on and everyone is there, but then the NFL goes? You cannot beat the NFL. You cannot. Like, the NFL being on Christmas Day hurts you because that was your day that the whole sports world left you alone and let that be your day. And your day in the regular season has now been destroyed by the NFL. Even on a streaming service, they're beating you.
The biggest issue vis-a-vis the NFL thing is that it was a Wednesday, right? So you had,
it's not always on a Wednesday.
We've had NFL games, Thursday night game, Christmas Day, on a Sunday or a Monday or a Saturday, so the NFL's been on Christmas,
but now they're intentionally going on Christmas.
Yeah, it's this weird contorting to a Wednesday, and it's going to find favor with people. 24 plus million people combined, average watch each of those two games yesterday. Where they might lose people are the players, because you had this contrived thing where the 4 teams that played on Christmas played the previous Saturday against each other. Steelers played the Texans. Chiefs played the Ravens, then Steelers played the Chiefs, Ravens played the Texans 4 days later. So, and for the Chiefs, it was 3 games in 10 days. At some point, whenever the next CBA comes up, the NFL is going to push, obviously, to go into wherever it wants to go into, but whatever day, and it's going to throw its weight around and have that muscle. At some point, maybe the players are going to have to push back, and that's the obstacle, because it's not going to be people, because people will consume it. I did not consume it because it was on Netflix. I don't have Netflix, but followed along and listened on the radio. But I think the players may be the only blockade to that, in that it seems really we got shitty games. Like, those weren't, it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. I don't think you can do anything about that. By the way, Steelers played the Ravens on the Saturday, not the Texans. But I don't think
Chiefs, Texans, Steelers, Ravens, and
I don't think you can do anything. I don't think you can do anything about the quality of the game. It's the same thing with the CFP. Like, even when you had teams that everybody agreed should be in, there still was blowouts. Like, you're potentially gonna sometimes have blowouts. Steelers Ravens, for example, is always a good game, but it really wasn't that Saturday when I was driving back to Penn State. That wasn't. You're not gonna go in figuring that that's gonna be a blowout. You go in thinking that could be a good game. So I don't think you can do anything about blowouts. George, there have been blowouts on Christmas Day in the NBA in years past many, many times. The difference is the ratings always were great, and it's not. I think this is the issue. The NBA ratings on Christmas Day were not bad in general. They're bad in comparison to the NFL, because nobody could ever compete with the NFL. So I do get your point that it was a weird anomaly year where Christmas was on a Wednesday, but the NFL, I would imagine, is going to try to have a game on a streaming service, if nothing else, on Christmas Day every year, no matter when Christmas falls, because now they see the body of work that they can just knock out the ratings no matter what day it is. So if Christmas is on a Tuesday, they're going to go on Tuesday. If Christmas is on a Wednesday, they'll be on Wednesday. They'll tinker the schedule and have the team on Tuesday, Christmas Day, be on a bye the week before. Or if you can't do that because the end of the year, that team will play on a Thursday, so it'll be Thursday to Tuesday. It'll be the same as Saturday to Wednesday. They'll do that. They're gonna be on Christmas Day. I almost would guarantee this every year. And if they're gonna do that, that is gonna hurt the NBA. The NBA, that's the day. So I don't think the answer is, well, it was just an anomaly because they had the Wednesday, and normally Christmas might fall on a weekend day. I would imagine the NFL is going to try to get on Christmas every year, no matter what day of the week it is. And the NBA is going to want on Christmas Day every year, no matter what day of the week it is. That's their thing. If you're not going to start the season after Christmas, which is just a non-starter and ludicrous, they're not going to punt the whole fall that Charles Barkley wants. You can reduce the games, but even if you reduce the games, I do think the NBA is going to get hurt by losing Christmas Day, losing the luster there. I think their whole idea, this is a whole other conversation of the show, Kevin Durant spoke on this. I get the All-Star game's not entertaining, but I think they're effing it up to like a ludicrous level now.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he even said players don't want to do this now, so he might not
Kevin
be doing that
Durant's
with the All-Star.
calling for a return to the old format or just East-West. Yeah.
Or just get rid of the whole thing altogether, because doing what they want to do now is just ludicrous. I mean, we don't make a tournament out of this BS. I mean, the draft was also kind of crazy. Like, I mean, it's just what it is. Like, you're expecting too much out of an All-Star game. It's an All-Star game. It's not going to be the NBA Finals Game 7. It can't be that ever. But I don't know how the Christmas Day thing is fixed when the NFL is your competitor, because the NFL is always going to win. And I do think because of injuries, and George, I think this year also was a little, I will say on the anomaly front, I don't think Christmas Day can be helped in that regard, but I think this overall season was a bit of an anomaly for the NBA, where some of the big market teams were not good. Some of the star players were not on good teams. The Sixers, who are your big market drama, big star on that team, they were just so funky the first 2 months of the season. People were tuning them off. I think those things didn't really help the NBA. There wasn't as much offseason drama as you normally get. I mean, outside the Celtics win and people are complaining about, if Tatum's respected, like that's really it. There was no Ben Simmons, James Harden, Dale Morey, that type of thing. It wasn't as driven, the Kawhi Leonard story. That didn't help them as much. I think it was a bit of an anomaly year. I don't think the NBA is screwed necessarily, but I don't know what can be done, because I am pessimistic that even if you reduce the games, that it's going to really fix load management. But yeah, not a thing in the other sports as much. But you almost wonder when it creeps up in there, George. You almost wonder when it creeps up in there, because if you're gonna lose some of these guys in a 162 game season in the MLB, a lot of those players already are getting hurt and not playing 20 games. Maybe you're going to start thinking, like, should I not load management these guys? And I get them more in the postseason. I get them to play better whenever they're in, rather than losing them off injury. You just wonder when it gets into the other sports. But I don't know what the fix is for the NBA. I don't. The NBA is not. Even gets Kevin Durant caught himself. We're not in trouble as a league. It's just weird. It looks bad.
Yeah.
But I think when you're going up against the NFL, no one's going to beat the NFL. I mean, I don't like. You're just not going to. No one's going to beat the NFL. The NFL is the worst NFL game in terms of entertainment is always going to draw ratings. That's what's crazy. That's the NFL boom that nobody else has. That even if the game is not entertaining, the worst matchup, the worst entertaining game, the worst intriguing matchup in the NFL will draw ratings that no other league, including the NBA, can touch. That no one has that. And you did have quality games, but in the NBA on Christmas Day, but the NFL just is the freaking NFL.
Mm-hmm. Much still to be learned as we move forward in this media landscape. Oy, oy, oy. That will put a nice bow on this edition of the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show. A reminder to find us wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple, TuneIn, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Search Howitzer to find us. Also, thanks to Kellen B. Conley and the Podcast Group, providing great podcasts for the people. podcastgroup.com, and also thanks to B-. Check him out, universe.com, where you can find all of his music.
Yeah, I got a new album at the end of the year, so I'm sure more tunes are coming here in 2025 for the B-. But you can also find us everywhere on social media at Gerbo3, at MikeOssie11, at House of Buzz-saw for the show handle, and of course, as George said, everywhere you get your podcasts, we are available. So if you can't find us, you are just not trying hard enough. As we move to another year of the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show in 2025, and I'm sure a lot of what we just kind of complained about here in the last couple hours on this show is not going to calm down. The drama will continue. The news will continue to be asinine. The games will be intriguing. The mess will still keep being around. The chaos will continue as well. And we will talk about it here on the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show.
A happy new year to one and all. This has been another edition of the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show, where we conquer rankings, ratings, and sports radio.
One day and 1 year at a time.